Endocrine is the easiest subject on the USMLEs, and that's exactly why so many students get it wrong. The entire endocrine system runs on one principle: feedback loops. One gland signals another, the second responds. If the response doesn't make sense, something upstream failed. But most students weren't taught to think this way. Instead, they memorized hormone fact. Then the exam shows a normal TSH in a patient who looks clearly hyperthyroid, and the diagnosis somehow gets ruled out. Today, I'm sharing exclusive footage from our paid course showing how top scorers actually think through endocrine and how you can use the same feedback loop system on every endocrine question to get more points in less time. So today, I want to switch gears and talk about endocrinology. Okay. So specifically diabetes mellitus and thyroid hormones. These are probably two of the most important conditions that are in endocrinology, and I think that they can tell us a lot about other diseases as well, which is why I wanted to start with these. We'll talk a little bit about diabetes because we've covered it in other sections, particularly in the biochemistry section, but we'll spend the majority of today talking about thyroid hormones. So let us get started. So remember, these are the pathogenesis to presentation questions. These are the things that you are supposed to understand. And if you understand them, you'll understand the vast majority of what it is that I talk about in this lecture. So at the end of every lecture, at the bottom, I post these along with the answers so that literally all you have to do is watch the video and then copy and paste the answers into your cards. And as long as you've done the work of doing your cards every day, you will never forget the information in these cards. And if you read the article that I released last Sunday, you'll know that the NBME cares most about your ability to apply information. This is applied information. And so if you understand this, it means that you are able to apply it in some way that's clinically relevant, which is exactly what they're asking you to do on all of your NBMEs, all of your USMLE Step 1, Step 2, Step 3, and shelf exams. So after this is your goal. You want to understand all of these. Okay, so let's get started. Let's start with Alex. So Alex, what exactly defines diabetes mellitus?
I guess insulin dependence or maybe for glucose control.
Yeah, it's the second. So it's interesting because it's like we think of the mechanism, but really it's just high glucose, high blood sugar, right? That's it. It's defined operationally is how it's described. So there's different cutoffs, right? So fasting glucose above 126, 2 times, or non-fasting above 200, 2 times, or A1C above 6.5. Okay, so for diabetes type 1, Catherine, what is the general pathophysiology, just generally speaking?
Okay, so I guess a decrease in insulin causing an increase in glucose.
Perfect. Yeah, exactly. So it's usually autoimmune destruction of the pancreas, which leads to a relative insulin deficiency, which leads to too much blood sugar. Great. So Danielle, what would be this is a harder question. So what's the general pathophysiology of diabetes type 2?
So for type 2, you have insulin resistance. So your body, like the cells, can't utilize insulin and uptake glucose. So then your body thinks that it's not producing insulin because your body is not registering it. So it overproduces insulin. And then that causes, I'm trying to think of the word, like destruction of cells. What's that protein?
Amyloid.
Yes, amyloid. Sorry,
Yeah,
having a brain
exactly.
fart. Yeah, over like a production of amyloid, and that's destructive to cells.
Yeah, that's actually pretty good. I don't know that I would say that this body doesn't recognize that it's producing insulin. I guess probably the more accurate way of saying it is that because of the insulin resistance, so because of the insulin resistance, you have to overproduce insulin in order to bring the blood glucose down, right? And so amylin, one of the byproducts of too much amylin production is amyloid, which gives you beta cell dysfunction, which gives you a relative insulin deficiency and hyperglycemia. So again, they both are ending in blood sugar that's too high. We'll talk a little bit more about what amyloid means because this is something that was really confusing to me for a while. So we have some diagrams that we can explain. So Elaine, can you tell me, would you produce more or less insulin in early diabetes type 2 than a normal person?
So you would produce more insulin than a normal person?
Yeah, why?
Because like in the previous explanation, it says that in type 2 diabetes, you have an insulin resistance. So your body tries to compensate by overproducing that insulin.
Yeah, exactly. So it's interesting, right? Because like you wouldn't necessarily think of
like I never really thought of diabetes type 2 as being like, oh, I'm actually making more insulin than normal, but that's actually what you see. And even like pre-diabetics, right? When they say like you're pre-diabetic, that's really probably where the insulin production is highest. And so the point is that over time, eventually, because of that amyloid production, you get beta cell dysfunction, and that causes you to not be able to produce enough insulin. Perfect. So Elisa, what exactly is amyloid?
If you're serious about maximizing your scores, join our 14-day mini course now. We'll send you 14 high-yield videos that break down the exact concepts and test strategies our students use for 260 plus scores. Click the link in the description below now to get instant access.
So to my understanding, it's basically misfolded protein, and you can have that from all kinds of diseases where protein ends up precipitating in different organs, and usually proteins are being degraded by the proteasome, but in case of amyloid, that protein isn't degraded correctly and ends up participating.
Good. That's actually surprisingly good. Can you tell me why, Elisa? Like why exactly does that happen? That you get this accumulation of misfolded proteins?
It has to do something with a general overproduction of that protein, that I guess I could imagine that reading everything at a time isn't sufficient enough.
Yeah. So the way that I understand this, the way that like my reading of this is that during protein synthesis, right, there's always some fraction of proteins that are misfolded. That's just a natural thing. Our body takes advantage of this by using MHC1, right? So the proteins that come from the proteasome are loaded into MHC1, if you'll recall from immunology. And because it's sampling, because some fraction of all the proteins that you make are going to be misfolded and need to be ubiquitinated and broken down, right? So those fragments are loaded to MHC1, and it's loaded into the outside of the cell, and so that gives CD8 cells a sense of what's going on inside the cell. So we take advantage of this, but some fraction of proteins always misfold. So they're ubiquitinated, and then they go to proteolysis, the proteasome. You need to remember the ubiquitination proteasome. For some reason, they just love that for step one. They just love it. Ubiquitin proteolysis, like there is a disproportionate number of questions about the proteasome. You just have to remember that's all. That's like oftentimes what they're asking you. So what you also need to know is that there's some parts of proteins, right? So proteins are often made up of what are called peptides, right? So peptides are just sequences of amino acids. And so oftentimes you'll put together these peptides into proteins. And so some part of them can't be broken down sometimes. So the hydrophobic part is a part that oftentimes can be broken down. And so those things will aggregate. They will form, they will clump. And it kind of makes sense, right? Because if something isn't soluble, if something isn't dissolved in the blood or in the cell, it would make sense that a protein wouldn't be able to necessarily degrade it, right? Something like that's solid, that's inside of the cell. So in simple terms, if I were to explain this, I would say that a misfolded protein needs to be broken down, right? So it's ubiquitinating, needs to be broken down. However, not all the parts of the proteins can be broken down. Those parts that can't be broken down will accumulate and they'll bind to each other to form amyloid. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So the question is why is it so bad? So Jason, why is amyloid so bad?
I would say because it can be deposited in like tissues and cells where it can obstruct natural physiological processes.
Perfect. Yeah, that's like a great med student answer. Big words like physiologic process. That's good. Yeah. Yeah. It just causes cells to dysfunction. Perfect. Makes sense, right? Because it's hydrophobic, so it would precipitate. And so really, let's walk through the mechanism of how amyloid would form. So we've got a protein, right? Proteins are composed of different components. Usually, oftentimes they're composed of different polypeptides, although sometimes a protein could be just a single polypeptide. But let's say that there's a protein and there's a part that you can degrade in the proteasome and there's a part that you can't. So some fraction of proteins undergo misfolding, happens to even the best of them. And so they get ubiquitinated. When they're ubiquitinated, that sends them to the proteasome for proteolysis. And in proteolysis, you can degrade the part that's degradable. However, there's some part of some proteins that can't be degraded. Not all proteins, but some proteins. And so what happens is that, because the question really is like, why do you see amyloid in protein overproduction? Calcitonin and medullary carcinoma, you have the AA amyloidosis that you get in chronic inflammation, right? Like why? The reason is the way that I understand it is that this happens for those proteins, at least to some degree. But when you overproduce the protein, you just have a lot more of it, right? So if you have more protein synthesis, when I have more proteins, a certain fraction of them are going to misfold. They're going to undergo ubiquitination. Those are going to undergo proteolysis. And then those are you're going to degrade the degradable parts, the proteolyzable parts. So what happens is that when I overproduce protein, so in the case of diabetes type 2, right, if I'm making a ton of insulin, which also is going to be released with amylin, some of the amylin is going to misfold. Some of the amylin is going to have to be ubiquitinated. Some of the amylin is going to undergo proteolysis, but I am going to be left with the non-degradable parts of that amylin over time. And so the more amylin, which is released with insulin, right? So the more insulin and amylin I produce, I'm actually just speeding up the degradation, or I'm speeding up the loss of my pancreatic islet cell, right? Because one of the questions is like, why, when the type 2 diabetes, why was I able to make a lot of insulin in the beginning, but why did that ability decrease over time, right? And this explains why in a very, very simple mechanism. Question so far, this is something that like I didn't understand until, honestly, probably residency or after. It wasn't I didn't understand the general mechanism of amyloidosis for a long time. So I'm sure that I didn't explain this perfectly. Questions, concerns? All right, well, let's see how I explain this. So Maliha. So absent any contraindications, what's the typical first line drug for diabetes type 2?
Metformin?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, metformin. Great. So Manny, given the pathophysiology of type 2 diabetes, what's the mechanism of action of metformin, and why would that sort of make sense, Manny?
So I guess what I know is that it's the only drug that I remember that reverses, or I guess works on the actual mechanism of type 2 or pathophysiology of type 2 diabetes, which is insulin resistance. So it decreases insulin resistance, and I think it has something to do with gluconeogenesis. Maybe.
Yeah.
Does it increase glucose?
Well, if I was trying to think, okay, so you can think this through, right?
Mhm.
So if I was trying to control, so diabetes is high blood sugar,
Mhm.
diabetes mellitus by definition. So
You don't want to make more glucose.
yeah, so what effect would it have on gluconeogenesis?
Probably would decrease the liver making more glucose.
Exactly, perfect. And that was a Nature paper in like 2014. It's a big deal. They figured out that one of the mechanisms was decreased liver gluconeogenesis. Because it's still not entirely worked out. There's like a ton of different mechanisms, but that are posited. Maybe it acts in the GI tract, but they know that at least part of it, it seems to work in the liver. It's pretty cool. Yeah, so you decrease glucose production, and so you would need less insulin. So it actually works really well. So Marco, would metformin increase the rate of decay of the pancreatic islet cells? Why or why not?
No, it will not, because it controls the gluconeogenesis of the liver. So metformin is considered a fantastic drug for the diabetes type 2.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. Theoretically, you would even think that it might slow the progression, right?
Yeah.
If there was less insulin that were needed, if at least part of the mechanism of progression of type 2 diabetes is that you have islet cell dysfunction because you're overproducing insulin and amylin and producing amyloid as a byproduct, then yeah, I actually think it would be better. Great. Mashoud. So after metformin, what's the typical second line drug?
It'll be sulfonylureas.
Yeah, sulfonylureas. Perfect. So Natalie, using the pathophysiology of diabetes type 2, can you explain the mechanism of action and how this would fit in?
So sulfonylureas, I believe they inhibit the potassium channel, allowing for more calcium to come in and then insulin to go out. Is that correct?
Boom. Yeah. Well, so walk me through. So how would that work? So if I close potassium channels, what effect is that going to have on cell membrane depolarization?
So it's going to cause the cell membrane to remain at a negative action potential, because then the calcium will come in because it'll want to go towards the negative.
Not quite. So calcium wanting to come in is irrelevant in the sense of like whether it comes in or not, right? Calcium will come in if the calcium channels are open.
Okay.
Right. In other words, if I were to hyperpolarize the cell even more, in other words, if I were to make the inside of the cell even more negative, you're not really going to have that much more calcium come in. That's not the mechanism that drives calcium in. The mechanism that drives calcium in is just depolarization of the membrane.
Okay, and then that causes the insulin release.
Well, that causes calcium to come in.
Okay.
Right. So
And that calcium allows for the binding of the insulin vesicles. Correct?
exactly. Yeah. So snare and snap protein, the things that are cleaved by, you tell me actually. So do you know what cleaves snare proteins? That's a microbiologic protein.
Can't think of it.
Botulism.
Oh,
Botulinum toxin. So it prevents, right? So acetylcholine, right, which activates nicotinic receptors at neuromuscular junction, is in vesicles, and the vesicles need calcium to activate the snare and the SNAP proteins. So they will botulinum toxin cleaves those. I think it's SNAP, one of the SNAP proteins, but something in that complex, and it prevents the release of acetylcholine, right? But it's a calcium dependent mechanism. So the calcium influx causes the release. So yeah, so you close the ATP gated potassium channels, and that causes depolarization of the cells. That causes, I didn't say it here, but that causes calcium influx, and ultimately that causes insulin relief. I don't want to get too far into that mechanism. If you guys don't remember it, that is covered in the biochemistry lecture. So look for the lecture on glutamate dehydrogenase deficiency, glutamate dehydrogenase. I think it's a hyperactive radiation. But yeah. Okay, so Paula, can you tell me, would sulfonylureas increase the rate of decay of the pancreatic islet cells? Why or why not?
I think they would, because they push you to release more insulin, and I think that would probably increase the insulin production.
Yeah, exactly.
And so
right?
increase the amyloid.
Yeah. So unlike metformin, which decreases my glucose production, right? Sulfonylureas go on the opposite end. They're just trying to increase my insulin production. The problem is that, again, part of the problem with type 2 diabetes is that we are overproducing insulin, which is causing overproduction of amylin, which is causing amyloid production, which is causing the beta cell destruction in the first place. So by the time that you're on sulfonylureas, you're already essentially you're kind of like flogging a dying pancreas. Right? Like, I imagine like an old horse and carriage setup, and you're just like, the horse is like dying, but you're like just beating it to try to get it out of the gas. And it doesn't end well, as we will see.
Sounds disturbing.
I know. So imagine that next time sulfonylureas. So Perlina, so after sulfonylureas, what typically is the next step in pharmacologic management?
So after sulfonylureas, at that point, the pancreas is dying, so you go to insulin.
Yeah, usually you go to insulin. Again, like there's all these like second and third line things, and maybe there's something else, but in general, this is the typical steps. So you start to give them exogenous insulin. So Sebastian, if you are using the pathophysiology of diabetes type 2, what's the significance of getting to the point of using exogenous insulin for glucose control?
Well, basically, you start with the sulfonylurea, right, to make more insulin as well as amylin. So you destroy your pancreas, basically, specifically beta cells. So you need insulin, exogenous insulin, because you can't make insulin yourself. So
perfect. Yeah, exactly. So if we think of, right, this is a long explanation, but if you think of sulfonylureas as sort of like flogging a dying horse, the horse is like kind of dead by the time that you're using insulin. Like, it's not fully dead, but it's like getting there. And so you now need to bring in outside insulin to help it along, right? Because there's no way that you are able to produce enough insulin from your islet cells. Perfect. Nice. It also explains, I mean, so like you can also use this to understand why, for example, I didn't talk about this in this lecture, but why, for example, metformin doesn't cause weight loss, but the other drugs do, right? Because again, insulin is like the whole basis of keto diet and Atkins and low carb is basically because insulin causes you to prevent lipolysis, right? Because insulin blocks hormone sensitive lipase, right, which is what breaks down fat in your adipose tissues. And insulin increases the activity of acetyl-CoA carboxylase, which is the key regulated step of making fatty acids. So in other words, insulin causes you to not break down fat and to make fat, right? So metformin, guess what? Doesn't cause you to increase insulin. If anything, it probably decreases your insulin. And so it doesn't cause any weight gain. Guess what does cause weight gain? Phosphorylureas, right? So you can use the mechanism, right? So again, they'll test you on related things. They might not test you on exactly this thing that you've learned, but if you understand the mechanisms, you will be able to use that knowledge in a question that's related as well. All right. So questions before we move on, because we are going to move on to the HP and organ axis next. Things that I didn't explain well. All right. Okay. So next we're going to talk about the HP and organ axis, right? So could be the HP thyroid axis, HP A axis. So the general way that you have hormonal control in your body is that you have the hypothalamus, which releases some releasing hormone, right? So TRH, right? Thyroid releasing hormone, let's say, for example. It acts on the pituitary, the anterior pituitary should be, and that releases a stimulating hormone like TSH, which works on some sort of end organ, right? Like the thyroid or the adrenal cortex or something. And then you release some sort of hormone, which then inhibits the upstream things, right? Like it'll inhibit the pituitary and the hypothalamus, for example. Okay, so that's the very like 20,000 foot view of how the endocrine systems, basically most of the endocrine systems work. Okay, so let's start with some terminology. Alex, can you tell me what exactly does it mean to have a primary endocrine disorder?
So like primary and secondary is talking about like where the disorder is.
Perfect.
So primary is, sorry, I'm blanking. I think primary is the organ itself.
Perfect. Yeah, exactly. And secondary would be where?
Secondary would be like anything downstream of the organ.
Downstream would be actually upstream. So primary means it's a disorder of the end organ itself, right? So if I said someone has primary hypothyroidism, Catherine, what would that mean?
Okay, so hold on, let me think this out. So if somebody has primary hypothyroidism, okay, so I think like autoimmune or Hashimoto, I think a decrease in T3, T4. So it would mean like, so low thyroid hormone levels and an increase in TSH. So
well, let's take a step back. So big picture, what exactly saying like, so primary, we said a primary endocrine disorder is a problem in the end organ itself, right?
Okay.
So the end organ in hypothyroidism is the thyroid gland.
I'm sorry, are you asking me a different question? Okay, so the end organ is the thyroid, right?
Yeah, exactly. So if it's primary hypothyroidism, like where is the problem? Is it in the thyroid?
So you'd have it'd be in the thyroid, so you'd have a decrease in thyroid hormone.
Perfect. Yeah, exactly. But in other words, it's not a problem in the pituitary and it's not a problem in the hypothalamus.
Oh, okay. Okay, I understand. Yes.
So this is an important distinction, particularly for step one, because they will ask you these sorts of definition questions. Again, they won't ask you like, what is the definition of primary hypothyroidism? But they could ask you, and they do ask, what would you expect to see in terms of TSH and TRH in primary hypothyroidism? So yeah, so problem in the thyroid hormone itself. So Danielle, what would secondary or tertiary endocrine disorders be?
So secondary would be like what's occurring at a different source, but affecting the organ itself, like affecting
Which source?
Be like an ectopic source.
So
Or
now
maybe
you're
more like-
using like general language, right? Secondary meaning like some other place. That's not what, so endocrinology is a very specific terminology here. And it's important to know. So secondary refers to what?
Like I'm thinking of like, I guess for like an example, like,
It's the pituitary.
okay,
So in other words, the organ that is just upstream of the end organ itself.
okay.
Right. So what would the tertiary endocrine disorder be?
Would that be like another source, like a cancer or something like that?
So it would be one step up from the pituitary, which is what?
Like the hypothalamus?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Perfect. Yeah. So again, these are very specific meanings, and like very few people actually know this. I'm actually like, it's again, because I don't think they teach you guys definitions. So secondary means is for endocrine disorders, right? This is just endocrine disorders. If I say that like someone has hypertension secondary to blah, 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 I don't mean it's in the pituitary, right? This is specific to endocrine disorders. So but if I say someone has secondary hypothyroidism, I mean that there's a problem with the pituitary. And if I say that they have tertiary hypothyroidism, I mean that they have a problem with the hypothalamus. Those are one and the same, okay? So let me make this very clear, right? So primary organ dysfunction happens at the end organ itself. Secondary organ dysfunction, right? Secondary hypothyroidism, let's say, happens in the pituitary. And tertiary happens just upstream of the pituitary in the hypothalamus, right? If you're having like a light bulb moment, you're not the only one, because I've seen a lot of people. The reason I know this is an issue is because I do NBME questions with students. And this is a question that gets, a lot of people get wrong. And it's really simple. It's like 3 points on your test. So again, primary, end organ, secondary, pituitary, tertiary, hypothalamus. Only for the HP end organ axis, right? If I say something is like secondary, hypertension secondary to something, I don't mean it's in the pituitary, right? That really is a general source. It could be from something general. But secondary is a very different meaning when it comes to endocrinology. Okay, so let's use some of this stuff. Elaine, can you tell me, using the definitions, if someone had primary versus secondary versus tertiary hypothyroidism, what would the TRH, the TSH, and the T3, T4 levels be?
So in primary hypothyroidism, you would see decreased T3 and T4 and elevated TSH.
But the TRH?
TRH would also be elevated
Boom. Yeah, exactly. Why?
because the dysfunction is in the thyroid and not in the pituitary or in the hypothalamus.
Yeah, that's true. But why mechanistically? There's really only one skill that you really need to understand about endocrinology, and it's this. You need to understand feedback inhibition, right? You need to understand that the hormone is going to suppress the hypothalamus and the pituitary, okay? So
Okay.
if I have primary hypothyroidism, why would I have high TSH and high TRH? Using the concept of inhibition, feedback inhibition.
Because it will suppress the pituitary and the hypothalamus.
Well, okay, so I'm making, the problem with hypothyroidism is I'm making more, too much, or too little thyroid hormone?
Too little.
Too little, great. So if I have less thyroid hormone, am I going to suppress my pituitary more or less?
Oh, you'll suppress it less to increase.
Yeah, exactly. So so again, where it gets complicated, right? It's a double negative. Pressing pituitary less. In other words, I'm disinhibiting it. Another way of saying. How much TSH am I going to make? More. Boom. Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's use the same example with the hypothalamus. So if I have primary hypothyroidism, I'm going to make more or less T3, T4.
You're going to make less.
Less. Exactly. So if I make less T3, T4, what effect is that going to have on my hypothalamus?
You will increase the amount of TRH.
Good. Why?
Because you are T4.
Because you're what?
Because you're making less T3 and T4. So you are disinhibiting the hypothalamus.
Yeah, exactly. Because normally T3, T4 inhibits the hypothalamus. If I have less T3, T4, I will cause less inhibition of the hypothalamus, which means I will produce more of the TRH.
Okay.
Cool?
Cool.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. I should have done a better job of explaining that. Okay. But yeah, so I don't want you to think like, oh, just because the problem is, in the end organ, therefore like the upstream things are going to go up. No, you need to understand the mechanism. And that's what I didn't do a very good job of explaining. So thank you for pointing that out. Elisa, how about secondary? What would it be in secondary? What would the TSH, TRH, and T3, T4 levels be in secondary hypothyroidism, Elisa?
So in secondary, the TRH would be increased while TSH and T3, T4 would be decreased.
Boom. Why?
I'm lacking feedback of my end organ. And that's why my tertiary organ that's functioning is increasingly stimulating the secondary organ that's defect due to any reason.
Yeah. So in other words, if I have a pituitary problem and decreasing my production of TSH, it also means I'm going to produce less T3, T4. So if I have less T3, T4, I will disinhibit the hypothalamus and in theory the pituitary. Problem is I have a problem in the pituitary. So even if I disinhibit the pituitary, I can't increase my TSH. So TRH is up, TSH is down, T3, T4 is down. Great, exactly. And then let's go to Jason finally. So tertiary hypothyroidism, what would be the lab values, Jason?
Is this me, Jason? Okay. In tertiary, let's see, let's go in order. We're going to have an issue with the hypothalamus.
Great.
And so, okay, this is great. So that's going to be where our issue is. And so our TRH is going to be low. Our TSH, would that be elevated? Because you wouldn't have the...
Oh, it's interesting. No, not usually. I don't think so. I see what you're saying.
It would be decreased.
Because it's sort of hard.
Yeah.
Well, my TRH, I can't stimulate my pituitary, but like I'm also going to be inhibiting it from this now. I think the TRH wins in this case. So if I don't have TRH, I'm not going to stimulate the pituitary.
All right. So that everything should be decreased.
Yeah, exactly. Everything is low. Yeah, exactly. And no matter how much I disinhibit these other things, it's not going to matter because for the pituitary, I don't know.
Okay, yeah, because I was thinking, okay, the pituitary.
Yeah, it's a fair question.
Stimulated because it's not. Yeah, but I see then how everything would be decreased then.
Yeah, but it's the TRH that matters. Good, perfect.
Okay,
nice. So Litzel. So how about if I had primary versus tertiary hyperthyroidism? What would that look like, Ugh, geez. You can do this, man. You can, again, like all these things, as long as you understand feedback inhibition and the definition of primary, secondary, and tertiary, whatever organ dysfunction, like most questions will make sense to you in endocrinology. There's really not that much, honestly, to understand conceptually.
Can you repeat the question, please?
So explain to me what the TRH, TSH, and T3 and T4 levels would be in primary versus tertiary hyperthyroidism.
Oh, okay. So hyperthyroidism. Okay, so in primary hyperthyroidism, then you would have T3 and T4 increased, and then the TSH and the TRH would be decreased. And that's primary. And then tertiary, you would have, oh, wait, it's up there. Okay, so you would have T3 and T4 increased, and then TSH increased as well, and TRH increased too.
Boom. Yeah, exactly. Well done. Yeah. So in primary, right, I'm making a ton of hormone, a lot of T3, T4. That will cause an increase in inhibition of the hypothalamus and pituitary. So my TRH and TSH would be low. However, if it was tertiary, I would have a high TRH level, which means I'd stimulate my pituitary like crazy and make extra TSH. Extra TSH means I'm going to have extra T3, T4. So they're all high in tertiary. That's good. Well done. See, it's really like at core, it's not, as long as I explain it reasonably well, it's not that bad. So the key is did I explain it well? So questions so far, and I know that I didn't do a great job. Okay. You may just be being polite. Okay. So Luis, tell me, what are the two, this is a read my mind question, but basically what are the two major things that you need to make thyroid hormones? It's essentially two things. And that's it. It's like a number of chemical reactions, but what do you see there?
Okay, yeah. Two major things that you need to make thyroid hormones is iodine
Huh?
and TSH.
That's okay. Yeah, it's kind of, it's a bad question on my part. So you need tyrosine,
Oh yeah, tyrosine.
which is the amino acid, and you need iodine, which is what you said. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you could argue, yeah, you need TSH and TRH and all that other stuff too. But I mean, like in actual ingredients that go in to make thyroid hormone, it's essentially just two things, tyrosine and iodine. And then you do a couple chemical modifications, but that's essentially it. So Maliha, so use the fact that it's made from tyrosine and tyrosine in particular, to explain where the thyroid hormone receptor is in the cell.
It's in the cytoplasm
Boom.
or
Yeah.
like intracellular.
Yeah, it's intracellular. Good. Why? Why is it intracellular?
Because tyrosine is a non-polar amino acid.
Yeah, exactly. Tyrosine is a non-polar amino acid. Yeah. So tyrosine's non-polar. So if you remember, so it would make sense that the thyroid hormone would also be non-polar, right? Because it's made essentially from tyrosine. And so polar substances don't cross cell membranes. And so anytime that you have a polar substance, it will have a cell surface receptor, right? Insulin is a peptide, relatively polar, it's found at the cell surface receptor. Catecholamines, polar. I don't know if they're polar, but they're certainly, they might just be too large, but they are also on the cell surface. The only things that have intracellular receptors are nonpolar substances because they can cross cell membrane. So they enter the cell and then they go into they find the receptor inside the cell. So Manny, can you tell me what other hormone class has intracellular receptors?
I think steroid hormones.
Steroid hormones. Yeah, exactly. And why are they hydrophobic?
They're derived from hydrophobic substances, so they can cross the plasma membrane.
That is true, but which substance? You're gonna be like,
Is it cholesterol?
It is cholesterol. Yeah, exactly. So steroid hormones are made from cholesterol. And as anyone can tell you who's eaten bacon and tried to clean it up afterwards, cholesterol is nonpolar. Right? It does not dissolve in water. There was an article recently, I don't remember, it was like the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. There was this article about bacon. How everyone is like when they make bacon, because like bacon is like, it's like there's a resurgence of people eating bacon for, I guess, a variety of reasons. But everyone is putting even though everyone knows that they're not supposed to, they're putting the bacon grease in the sink and it's precipitating, right? Because it's nonpolar. And so it coats all of the pipes. And there have been like just masses of bacon, or basically animal fat, that because it's nonpolar, it all just like aggregates together. And so in like water treatment facilities and like sewers, like they've had to dislodge just these gigantic, like people-sized fat clobs. So cholesterol is nonpolar. This is all to say cholesterol is nonpolar. And so it will also cross cell membrane. So steroid hormones also work inside the cell. They don't have surface receptors. And Emily has like, ew, that's disgusting. But I tell you the story because it will stick with you. Just like the sulfonylureas flagging like your dying pancreas, you will remember that steroid hormones are made from cholesterol and that they will, that they do not precipitate, or that they do precipitate in water, they don't dissolve in water. And so that's why A, they cross cell membranes, and B, they will clog all of your pipes. Jason says, now I know why my mom always poured the grease in the jar after cooking and not down the sink. Yeah, exactly. I know. Yeah, it's one of those things that's like, you can always say like, oh, it's like, okay, yeah, just like this one time, but it is bad. Because even if it doesn't clog up your pipes, like the downstream effects for the system is pretty bad. All right, so Marco, so what exactly is thyroglobulin? When we say thyroglobulin, like what exactly is it? Generally speaking, what is it?
Okay, so thyroglobulin, it's a protein that's produced by the follicular cells and used within the thyroid gland.
Good. Why? Like, how is it used? And what's like the major defining feature of thyroglobulin? What's the major what? Sorry. Like defining feature. This is a bad question on my part.
It's a long protein. Is that it?
Yeah, it's a long protein and it has a lot of what amino acid?
Oh, a lot of tyrosine.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. It's a really long protein and it has a ton of tyrosine molecules.
Yes.
Right? 134 to be exact. Crazy. Right? It's just really long and has a bunch of tyrosine. Why? Because guess what thyroid hormone is made out of? Tyrosine, right?
Mm-hmm.
So why is it important to have a lot of tyrosines? We just said, right? Thyroid hormone is synthesized from tyrosine. So Mashoud, like when we say like T1 or T2 or T3, T4, what is the 1, 2, 3, and the 4 refer to?
That just means how many they're attached. I think it's how many atoms will be attached to that one
What
tyrosine.
atoms? What specific atom?
Is that what type of atoms? Will be the non-polar atoms?
So remember, thyroid hormone is made out of two things, right? Tyrosine, which
Yeah,
is
so
coming-
tyrosine and iodine.
perfect. Yeah.
Oh, iodine.
Yeah, exactly. So it refers to how many iodine or iodide
Iodine.
atoms there are. Yeah, that's it. That's literally all it is. Right? So how would then, Natalie, how would you make the T3 precursor within the thyroid gland?
So I believe, are you talking about?
Generally speaking, again, now I'm reading these questions. I realize these are kind of vague, so I apologize.
So I mean, when molecules come into the thyroid gland, the tyrosine and the iodine get coupled together. And so if you're doing a T3, you have two tyrosine molecules, one with one iodine and one with two iodine.
Boom! Exactly. Wow. I'm shocked that you understood what I was trying to ask. But
I'm
that
like,
was
I
really
think
good.
that's what
Yeah, that's really good. Perfect. Thank you. Despite my best efforts, you still were able to answer that. So thank you. So yeah, you have one tyrosine that is one iodine atom, right? So that would be the T1, right? And you got one tyrosine with two iodine atoms. That's the T2, right? So one iodine plus two iodines makes 3. So that's where the 3 comes from, literally. It's a really basic. So Paula, building off of Natalie's mind reading, can you please tell us how you get a T4 precursor made within the thyroid?
So it's made the same way, but instead of joining one MIT and one DIT, you join 2 DITs, which come up to a total of 4 iodide atoms.
Perfect. Exactly. Wow. And you're even using like the technical terms. You guys are like, oh man, you're really throwing me a lifeline. Thank you. Yeah. So you're putting together 2 diiodinated tyrosines.
That's what they stand for. I don't remember that. Yeah, I just remember like kind of like DITs.
Yeah. Perfect. So what exactly, Perlina, is colloid? Again, another vague kind of read my mind question.
Well, it's a collection of what's in the cell, so thyroglobulin.
Yeah, it's basically just a bunch of thyroglobulin, I guess is like the best way of thinking about it, which thyroglobulin in it of itself has a thyroid hormone precursor. So this is all just to build towards this wonderful picture that I found on Wikipedia, which is great for these kinds of things. We are going to walk through exactly how thyroid hormone is made. Okay, so basic diagram, let me walk you through. So you've got your nucleus, where you get transcription of the thyroglobulin protein, which eventually is translated in the rough ER. Right? So you have the thyroglobulin, right? And as you'll see, remember, thyroglobulin is just a long protein that has a ton of tyrosines, 134 tyrosines, right? Because thyroid hormone is made of just tyrosine and iodine. That's it, pretty much. So thyroglobulin is exocytosed into, right? So we're looking at the thyroid follicle, right? So you've got the follicular cells ringing it, and then you've got this pink stuff in the middle, which is the colloid, right? So into the middle of this, outside of the cell, into the center of the follicle, you have your thyroglobulin, which undergoes a number of reactions. But essentially what you're doing, right? So you've got tyrosine here, and then you've got tyrosine here. But the difference is that now I've added iodine to it. Right? That's what these little balls are supposed to represent. So we've got iodine that's been added here. And then you stick the tyrosines together. Right? So this would be DIT, this would be MIT, right? Because there's monoiodinated and diiodinated tyrosines. So then you stick them together, and what do you get? So this would have, Sebastian, would this be T1, T2, T3, or T4? This one right here.
That would be a DIT and a DIT together. So that would be a T4.
Boom, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And Sharon, what would this be? T1, T2, T3, or T4? Precursor. Technically, it's not those things yet because you have to cleave it off, but the precursor to what, Sharon? I think Sharon may not be able to respond. So this is T3, right? So 1, 2, 3. Hyperthyroid hormone is actually really simple. Again, it's just iodine and 2 tyrosine. It's pretty crazy. And so then it goes back. So then TSH, what's not pictured here is TSH then, when it stimulates the cell, it endocytoses this, and then you proteolyze, right? You cleave the thyroglobulin, and then you release the tyrosine, or the T3 and the T4. Okay, so again, let's go down the list. So to make it really clear, Alex, so what is this thing right here?
Tyrosine molecule.
Perfect. And Alex, can you tell me how many iodines are on this thing?
2.
Perfect. And Catherine, can you tell me how many iodines are on this thing?
1.
This whole thing. Remember, so now they've been conjugated together.
So that's the whole thing. So that's T3, correct?
Yeah, that's it. There's 3 iodines.
3.
Yeah, perfect. Right. So it's technically not triiodothyronine yet because you have to cleave it off. This is technically, but this would be like a T3 precursor. So yeah, again, this is not like endocrine. I love because it's pretty simple, honestly. Like it's simple and it explains a lot. Like it's one of the few things where like one theme can really apply to just about everything. So perfect. So next, let's go to Danielle. So Danielle, can you tell me again, repeat, what are the 2 major things that thyroid hormones are made from?
They're made from tyrosine and iodine.
Perfect. Tyrosine and iodine. Great. And so how exactly, Danielle, does radioactive thyroid ablation work?
I'm not sure. I'm actually not sure. I never really understood how the radioactive thyroid ablation works. Kind of just something I know.
I know. We know that we do it, but we don't know why. Can someone?
Yeah.
Can someone?
I need a
explain
lifeline.
how radioactive thyroid ablation works? It's like magic. Oh yeah, there's this thing. It ablates the thyroid.
Can I try this one?
Please.
I'm not positive, but
That's okay.
I think you give an iodine that is radioactive, like it's not a normal iodine molecule, and it's still going to get uptake by the thyroid. But since it is radioactive, instead of forming like T3, T4, it's going to actually cause degradation of the thyroid because it can't make any molecules out of it. So you're going to get a decrease in T3, T4 through that process.
So you are correct that it is radioactive. You are correct that the thyroid takes it up. It's not like I actually think it probably is incorporated in, right? That'd be my guess. It's just like a radioactive isotope, right? So just like hydrogen is normally 1 neutron, but sometimes it can have 2 or 3. So it's the same, or I guess proton. Sometimes it can have extra neutrons for hydrogen. So in terms of iodine, so it's radioactive, so it's taken up, and it's just radioactive, right? It is releasing radiation to the immediate environs. And so you're taking advantage of the fact that, right? Because you'll use it in things like Graves' disease or hyperthyroidism, right? Where you're making too much thyroid. And so you want to destroy these things that are overproducing thyroid. And so it's perfect, right? This is the one place that you use iodine in your body. And so you can increase the amount, or rather, if you give iodine that's normally taken up only by the thyroid, it'll be taken up by the thyroid, just like normal iodine is taken up by the thyroid. And then it will cause you to have damage to the thyroid. Perfect. So questions, does that make sense? It's a pretty brilliant mechanism, if you think about it. Just taking advantage of the normal uptake of iodine. And it's kind of like a Trojan horse, right? They gave them that like Trojan horse, and then inside of it was a bunch of guys, like soldiers. It's kind of like that. It's like you are putting something that is going to be bad for the thyroid into the thyroid, and you're ensuring that it only goes to the thyroid because the thyroid is the only thing that takes up iodine. So Elaine, can you tell us what medication would you need to take if you've had a thyroid ablation?
You would have to give thyroid hormone.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. One of my church friends actually had a thyroid ablation, radioactive thyroid ablation, and she has to take thyroid hormone for the rest of her life. Yeah, because you've destroyed the thyroid, right? Like you did your job, but it will no longer participate in the HP, the hypothalamus pituitary thyroid axis. So what instructions, Elisa, would you have to give patients about medications or food if they're about to get radioactive ablation of the thyroid?
Okay, let me think. I think you
don't have to overthink it, right? Like what normally would, so you want to prevent, basically you want to maximize the uptake of iodine into the thyroid. How can you do that?
So would you say by decreasing foods that normally, or salts that are iodinized?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And why?
Because they would compete with the sodium, the Na iodide transporter. It's a transporter.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's essentially, I mean, at core, there are just competitive inhibitors of each other. Right? If the normal iodine is taken up, that means that's one other molecule or one other atom of the radioactive iodine that's not going to be taken up. Essentially, right? It's not perfectly 1-to-1, but you can think about it that way. Yeah, exactly. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a big deal because it's hard because like everything contains iodine, right? So you talked about like the iodinated salts, but like everything has, like almost everything is iodine. So, right. So you're giving them radioactive iodine. If there's regular iodine around, then it will also go in through the sodium iodide symporter. And so then there will be less of the radioactive iodine that's taken up. Pretty simple. So instead, what you do is you tell them no iodine. And I don't know for how long, but it's for a bit. And the reason is because you essentially want to starve, because if they have less iodine, then it will increase the amount of iodine that it takes up even more, and there'll be less to compete to go in. And so if you reduce the amount of regular iodine, now there's even more radioactive iodine that will be taken up. So you'll have more radiation going to the organ that you wanted to go to, and less radioactive iodine just floating around in your blood causing damage other places. So yeah. Cool? Make sense? We have a question about the difference between T3 and T4 and the role of T3 being more active while T4 is, yeah. So I don't want to go too much into this. I will say that so in general, what you need to know is that T3 is more active and that T4 is oftentimes considered like a pro-hormone. I don't know that there's much more that you really need to know for like these exams. Is there something specific, Jason, that you were wondering?
Nothing specific in regards to that. I guess from first and second year, it's kind of drilled in our head like, oh, T3 is an active one. T4, there's more of it. And just trying to differentiate or just learning what's really, I don't want to be very general, but the big deal between the two, aside from that, is kind of what I was trying to drill down a little bit more on, because that's like basically.
So when you get to like the nitty gritty, so my mom is hyperthyroidism. I don't think she would mind me saying this. So my mom is hyperthyroidism. What's interesting is that like, this is something you didn't know in medical school, but like she basically has to take T3 and can't take T4, because normally when you give someone thyroid medications, you have to give them T4, or like that's like the standard is to give them T4, the thyroxine, as opposed to triiodothyronine. So for some reason, some people, and this is I guess established in at least a small amount of the literature, that like because it gets more complicated, but like the conversion of T4 to T3 happens oftentimes peripherally, right? So not in the thyroid.
Okay.
And so apparently there are different conditions, or some people just don't convert it as effectively or whatever, but there's a subset of the population who do not effectively convert T4 to T3. And so it becomes relevant because like for some people, they will still have signs of hypothyroidism, even though they would have what seem to be normal levels of T4. So,
okay. All right. That makes sense then. Okay.
But like in terms of, that's like, I didn't even learn that in med school. I just did extra reading because my mom was like telling me about like I need T3, and I was thinking like, oh, is this real, or is this like one of those things where patients tell me I need like brand name medications only? Like, is this just like one of those things in your head? But no, there's like actual literature behind this. So I don't want to poo-poo.
Okay,
say
so
whatever you want.
so basically don't read too much into it, then just kind of know T3 versus T4 and kind of leave it at that just for
Yeah,
board
I think like,
wise.
yeah, for boards, T3 is the active one. I'd say that's
yeah.
like what you need to know. Yeah. If you wanna like make
Okay.
people like my mom really happy, then you would understand that there's a little bit more than what's taught in medical school, in that not everyone can convert T4 to T3 effectively.
Okay, yeah, I think maybe in my physiology class there might have been some talk about that, and I just have foggy memory on it, so I just knew there was something there.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
that's
thank you.
mind. Yeah, of course. All right. So next, other questions before we move on to talk about thyroiditis and the difference between hyperthyroidism and thyrotoxicosis. So let's go to Luis next. So Luis, can you tell me what exactly is the difference between hyperthyroidism and thyrotoxicosis? A common misconception in medicine.
Okay, so hyperthyroidism is basically high thyroid hormone level, in this case T3 and T4, because of an overproduction of those two hormones. Overproduction.
How about thyrotoxicosis?
It's also high levels of thyroid hormones, but I think it's high thyroid hormone levels, but it may compromise your life, or there's an evidence, kind of like a storm, or it's too much thyroid hormone that can lead to a.
So it's actually, so interestingly enough, so the difference is, so you were right about the hyperthyroidism. So hyperthyroidism means you have high thyroid hormone levels because you're overproducing it. Thyrotoxicosis doesn't mean that it's like, it sounds like, oh my God, I'm gonna die, like thyroid storm, something crazy like that, but it's actually not. Thyrotoxicosis just means I have high thyroid hormone levels just for any reason, right? So in other words, hyperthyroidism is a type of thyrotoxicosis. Right? It's a specific type of thyrotoxicosis, right? So if I took high, like exogenous thyroid levels, I would be thyrotoxic, but I wouldn't be hyperthyroid. I'm impressed that you knew that hyperthyroidism was because of overproduction. There was a senior, when I was a first-year medical student at Stanford, there was a senior lecturer who like swore up and down that hyperthyroidism just meant that there was higher thyroid hormone levels. And I was like, well, okay, so then what does thyrotoxicosis mean? He had nothing to say, because this is a very misunderstood concept, but very simple. Hyperthyroidism means high thyroid hormone levels because you're making too much. Thyrotoxicosis means I just have high thyroid hormone levels. It's a variety of causes. So Maliha, what would be an example of hyperthyroidism?
Graves' disease.
Oh yeah, perfect. And how about Manny? What would be an example of thyrotoxicosis?
That would be taking like exogenous thyroid hormone.
Perfect. Can you give me another example?
Sorry, I'm not sure.
Okay, that's okay. So another example would be, so taking too much thyroid hormone, certainly. Another would actually be thyroiditis. So inflammation of the thyroid gland.
How does that work?
Ooh, I'm so glad you asked, because that's going to be our next slide. So remind me, Marco, what exactly is thyroid colloid?
Thyroid colloid. It's a collection of thyroglobulins.
Yeah, it's just a bunch of thyroid globulin, which has the thyroid hormone precursors, right? So Marco, can you tell me, like, how could thyroiditis lead to thyrotoxicosis? How does that make sense?
Oh, it's an inflammation of the thyroid. So if the inflammation leads to great storation of thyroid hormone on the gland.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, essentially. So the idea, right? So unlike other organs, the thyroid gland stores a ton of thyroid hormone, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, like other organs have like a little bit in vesicles, but like the thyroid hormone, like it stockpiles thyroid hormone in the form of the thyroid globulin that makes up the colloid, right? And so when you get inflammation, I don't know why. I assume it's because of, because like you have proteases in neutrophils and macrophages and stuff, right? So I presume that some of those proteases can cleave T3 and T4 and release it, but that's like a hand-wavy explanation. But the idea is that you have inflammation of the thyroid, and you can see actually that the colloid just like disappears. And the idea is that you're basically just depleting the colloid because you're cleaving it and you're releasing all that stored thyroid hormone into the bloodstream. That leads to thyrotoxicosis. Okay. Cool. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes, it does. Yes.
So Mashoud, so what would the TRH, TSH, and T3, 4 levels be in someone who had thyroiditis? And early thyroiditis, and why?
Okay. So in early thyroiditis, I'm thinking, okay, so because you said the thyroid has a lot of thyroid hormones, it's inflamed, so that means there's a lot of release of the hormones. And then so if I'm releasing a lot of thyroid hormones, I'm releasing a lot of T3 and T4.
Perfect.
And then going back to the hypothalamus pituitary axis, if I have a lot of T3, T4 due to negative inhibition, I believe that will decrease TSH and TRH.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. Yeah. Again, it all just comes back to feedback inhibition, right? Like as long as you understand the HP, end organ axis, and the hormone decreases activity of the H and the P, in other words, the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary, everything just makes sense. So yeah. So your T3 and your T4 would be high. You have inflammation, release of T3 and T4. That is going to feedback inhibit the hypothalamus and the pituitary. Boom. Yeah, exactly. So Natalie, in someone with late thyroiditis, what would the TRH, TSH, and T3, T4 levels be, and why?
I would think that in early thyroiditis, you kind of release all of your T3, T4. Maybe in late thyroiditis, you wouldn't have as much stored up. So then that would decrease. And then that decrease would lead to, you wouldn't have that feedback inhibition on TRH and TSH. So then those two levels would be high.
Boom. Nice. You're ready.
I hope so.
Yeah, that was good. That was really good. Yeah, exactly. Again, this is the kind of rationale that you need to be able to do on the spot on your test. That's it. That's all they're asking you to do, is to reason through it, to use your knowledge to reason through a situation that maybe you haven't seen before. That's it. That's all they want. They want you to be able to use it. They don't want you to memorize it. So good. That's good. So yeah, the problem is that you've released all of the T3 and the T4, and it's been degraded in your body like all hormones eventually do. But because the thyroid has had too low of TRH and TSH for too long, you haven't replaced it. You don't have it. And so now you have too little thyroid hormone, which causes disinhibition of TRH and TSH, which causes an increase in TRH and TSH, right? So in early thyroid toxicosis, the problem is that we have an increase, right? We have a release of all that colloid, all that stored T3 and T4. That's going to cause increase in inhibition of the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary, which is going to cause a decrease in my TRH and my TSH. Perfect. And we can probably end on this. So Paula, how exactly does radioactive iodine uptake work? And how is it used specifically for the diagnosis of thyroid pathology?
What is the first part?
How do you use radioactive iodine uptake to diagnose thyroid pathology?
So I think from what I remember that when you want to see that the thyroid does take up the iodine, and so you can visualize that through giving the person radioactive iodine and visualizing it through some kind of machine that detects that. And so if the thyroid gland isn't working, it won't uptake the iodine you gave the person, and you would see it you wouldn't see it in the imaging system you're using. Is that right?
Yeah, essentially. Saying if the thyroid gland isn't working is a little vague. I guess I would say specifically, if you're not actively making thyroid hormone, then you wouldn't take up the radioactive iodine. But yeah, otherwise that's exactly it. So you give radioactive iodine. So it's like in the case of radioactive thyroid ablation, right? It's radioactive iodine, but in this case it's different in the sense that it's the radiation that it emits is not like really toxic like the other kind of radiation. They do that by just having a different isotope that they give. And so it goes to the thyroid gland, and if the thyroid gland is making thyroid hormone, it'll take it up. If it's taken up, then it'll decay, and then you can use a nuclear medicine scanner to see how much and where the iodine was taken up. It's pretty cool, right? So let's look at what this would look like. So I got this image plus paper, which was referenced actually in Wikipedia, which is, again, a great place for finding a lot of these things. And so what you do is you've given someone radioactive iodine. It goes to their body, again, because the thyroid is the only place it's going to use that iodine. If the thyroid is making thyroid hormone, it'll look like this, right? So all of the cells have taken up that iodide. And so the iodide is sitting in those cells, and now it decays. And as it decays, right, you can use essentially like a Geiger counter to look at where the decay is coming from and how much there is. Okay. So normal would be A. B would be this would be like Graves' disease, right? So you can see how there's more of all of this everywhere, right? So this would be like Graves' disease. C would be, Perlina, do you know what C would be?
Oh, sorry.
This is a hard one.
Is it like thyroiditis?
No. So thyroiditis would be like, we'll talk about that. Thyroiditis would be E.
Okay.
But C would be like a toxic multinodular goiter, right?
Okay.
There's many nodes that are overproducing thyroid, right? But if you think about feedback inhibition, right? So you're making a ton of thyroid in these nodes. You'll notice that the other parts of the thyroid that aren't dark, they are actually lighter than normal. And that's because so these are independently producing, so also known as hot nodules, right? These are overproducing thyroid hormone, which is going to feedback inhibit TSH and TRH, which is going to cause for any cell that will still respond to TSH and TRH, meaning basically any normal thyroid cell, you'll have a decrease in production. So that's why it's actually darker in the other areas, which is also what you see in D, right? So D is just one big hot nodule. This would be like I think it's like an adenoma, like a thyroid adenoma. It's just a nodule that's producing too much thyroid hormone. And so again, you'll see that there's little production everywhere else. E is thyroiditis. Can someone explain why E would be thyroiditis? Actually? Or Perlina, if you want to give it a shot. So
Well, you're
Perlina.
making less thyroid
Good.
hormones.
Why?
So it's not going to be as dark.
Yeah.
Because so you're making less in thyroiditis, you're making less thyroid hormones. So then you won't take in as much of the radioactive iodine.
Yeah, exactly. And why are you making less thyroid hormone?
Because it's thyroiditis, because it's inflamed. So you release more than it'll die down.
Yeah. So walk me through again. I want you to use the concept of feedback inhibition. That is if there's like one thing that you learned from today, it would be feedback inhibition. That's like the key concept in all of endocrinology.
Okay. So with thyroiditis, you're initially releasing more thyroid hormone, which is inhibiting the TSH and the TRH. So those would be low. And then as time goes on, you're not making more of the thyroid hormone. So the levels would decrease, which would stop the inhibition of the pituitary and the hypothalamus. So your TSH and TRH would increase.
Yeah.
To try and make more.
Eventually. Yeah. But in this case, this would be like early thyroiditis. So what he's describing in the beginning, where you have release of the T3 and the T4, which will cause, like you said, a decrease in TSH and TRH release, which means that you will be making less thyroid hormone. And again, thyroid hormone is just tyrosine and iodine, right? So if you have less TSH, you're going to be taking up less iodine. So you're going to need to make less thyroid hormone. So yeah, so that's why you don't see it really dark. It's minimally dark. You can kind of barely see the hazy sort of outlines. Yeah, exactly. Well done.
Thank you.
So Sebastian, tell me, we kind of already talked about this, but use the underlying pathophysiology to explain how the labs would look in the early part of the disease for Graves versus subacute granulomatous thyroiditis.
Okay, wait, limiting. So I think in both the T3 and T4 will be high,
Good.
meaning that if we measure the TSH and TRH, they will be low.
Good. Yeah, exactly. So how would you know? How could you tell the difference, right? Or similarly, right? What if someone was taking like exogenous thyroid hormone? How could you tell the difference?
By doing a radioactive iodine.
Ooh, interesting. And what would that tell you? How would you be able to tell by using radioactive iodine?
It's great disease. Okay, if you're taking exogenous thyroid hormone, your thyroid is not making the thyroid hormone, meaning that there will be less uptake of iodine, so less reactive and less painted in the nuclear scanner, right?
Perfect. Yeah, exactly. How about Graves?
In Graves, there's an autoimmune disorder telling your thyroid to make more T3 and T4, meaning that the uptake will be higher. So there will be more activity in the thyroid gland.
Perfect. Yes, exactly. Perfect. Yeah. So this is, again, a very important concept to know. They love to test this on step one, right? So the early labs would be identical. TSH would be low, TRH would be low, your free T3 and your T4 would be high. However, right, because you have the thyroid stimulating immunoglobulin, right, the antibody against TSH in thyroid disease, in Graves' disease, you're making more thyroid hormone. So you would have more radioactive iodine uptake. It'd be high, right? See here, right? So it's high. You're making more. Whereas in the case of thyroiditis, you're making less thyroid hormone, right? Because in this case, there's low TSH, and you don't have something that's telling your thyroid to make more, like an antibody against TSH, the TSH receptor. So your radioactive iodine uptake would be low. Yeah, exactly. So that's why thyroid, so even though the labs would be the same, right? High T3, T4, low TRH, low TSH, between Graves, B, and thyroiditis. In the case of Graves, it's because you're actually hyperthyroid. You're making too much, right? So you would have a high uptake. And in E, you're not making any. You're making much less. And so you'd have low radioactive uptake. This is a very important concept for your test. All right, perfect. So I am going to end this here. Questions, comments, concerns before we wrap up? We'll do more next time.
Alec, I just have a quick question. You said in Graves' disease, TSH would be low. Is it been really quick? Because I'm thinking, I don't know if I'm thinking wrong or something, but if you have TSI, wouldn't is that stimulating TSH directly or?
No, it's a receptor. Okay. It's basically as if the receptor it thinks that there's high TSH, right? Because you have an antibody it's a weird antibody, right? Like normally you think of antibodies as causing a dysfunction. In other words, it causes it would block the receptor so that it doesn't work. In Graves' disease, the antibody actually causes the receptor to work, right? So so your body thinks that TSH is high because you have these antibodies binding to the TSH receptor, but your TSH is actually low, right? Because you have feedback inhibition from the high T3 and T4 that you're making.
Oh, okay.
Does that make sense?
Because I thought TSI directly stimulated TSH.
Yeah, no. At least I'm pretty sure, unless someone corrects me, I'm pretty sure that TSI is against the TSH receptor specifically. And so if it's against on the thyroid gland, so it stimulates the thyroid gland. It's basically like an independent mechanism of stimulating the thyroid gland. That's not TSH. And so you overproduce T3 and T4, and the overproduction of T3 and T4 will cause a decrease in TSH and TRH. Natalie says that's correct, and she's taking her sub-1 in a week and a half, so it's got to be correct.
Right. All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Other questions?
Yeah, Alec, really quick.
Yeah.
So thyroiditis can be found so there's some inflammation, meaning that the follicular cells will be separating. So the content in the colloid would leak out, meaning that more T3, T4 is at the bloodstream.
I guess so. I don't know exactly why it does. I know that it does. I would maybe it's like you said, it would make sense that it was like leakage out, like you get edema into cells, like leakage of the colloid in between the cells. Certainly plausible. I don't actually know if that's true. But if you look at look at a picture of Hashimoto's or thyroiditis sometime, look at histology pictures, you will see that the colloid, right, instead of being this like plump pink thing, it looks like raggedy and it's like all gone.
Okay.
So I don't know. The way that I make sense of it is that so you think about emphysema. Right? Emphysema is driven by inflammation. So you have neutrophils that go to the alveoli and they release proteases, right, which break down protein. And so they break down the elastin and stuff like that, like proteases, elastase. So the same thing is true for inflammation of the thyroid, presumably. So you could have inflammatory cells, which I presume would release proteases. And those proteases could cleave, again, the protein, thyroglobulin, which would release T3 and T4. That's a hypothesis. I don't know if that's true. What I do know though is that you have less thyroid colloid, and yeah, it happens presumably because of inflammation.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? These are good questions. Great questions. Marco.
I have one, please. There's a situation that is called subclinic hypothyroidism.
Oh, yeah.
It's a tough thing. I don't know if it's really asked on the step.
Not step
situation.
1. Sometimes maybe step 2.
Yeah.
To be honest, I don't really
think about that.
Subclinical. Yeah. Let me look that up and I'll give you a better answer next time. It never really made sense to me, honestly. If you have the answer, please tell me. But I will look it up, but give me a chance to give you a better answer. I don't want to lead you down.
Yeah, I'm asking you that, but just afternoon, I have seen a patient that she has a diagnosis of hypothyroidism because of Hashimoto's disease, but she's taking these thyroid hormones, the T3, the T4, but he still has a few symptoms like fatigue, like edema at the lower limbs, but she has good results on
All of her lab
lab
normal.
tests. Okay. So she's taking the medication. She has a good results on the lab, but she still has some symptoms. That's our lesson today really called her. Sorry, this afternoon.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I'm by no means like an endocrinologist, but I don't know. I mean, is she taking T3 and T4 or just T4?
No, just G4. Just G4.
So it could be like my mom. I don't know. Could be like my mom. She may, because again, the problem is that we measure T4, right?
Mm-hmm.
Usually we measure free T4, even though T3 is the active one. So it's theoretically possible that maybe, I don't know. Let me look up subacute or subclinical hypothyroidism more.
Okay.
But I guess one thought would be maybe it's that you can't just give T4 to people that are hypothyroid.
Okay.
So that's a possibility. Good question. Other questions, thoughts, concerns? All right. But today we are going to be talking about vitamin D and parathyroid. Probably get to bone metabolism next time. Okay, so let's get started. So these are the integration and application questions. Again, I'm trying to think of a good way to describe these, but essentially what this is your I will never forget this lecture if I copy and paste these into my Anki cards questions. For all of these things, as we saw last time, I can't remember who it was who used the primary, secondary, tertiary terminology perfectly. Who was it that said, they're like, oh, this is a primary. I don't even remember what they said, but it was like, yeah, Paula, it was awesome. And it was very obvious that you had made those into cards afterwards. Well done. All of you guys, I want you to make these into cards afterwards. As when I post it, I will post them with the integration application questions. But again, the purpose of this is that you can, just like we were talking about with Harsha, right, whose score improved by 30 points in 4 weeks, right? Just basically by trying to make sense of things, by connecting things. That is the entire purpose of these questions, to help you to integrate and connect these things. So we can all be like Harsha. Okay, parathyroid hormones. Let's start with the basics. So Alex, the first one's a gimme. So the parathyroid hormone, it's secreted by the parathyroid glands. Makes sense. So what effects, Alex, does parathyroid hormone have on serum calcium and phosphate levels?
Hey, so it increases serum calcium and decreases serum phosphate levels.
Perfect. Exactly. And Alex, can you tell us how?
So for calcium, I think there's a couple ways it increases it. One is it increases resorption in the kidneys. Another way is it signals osteoclasts and osteoblasts to break down bone to resorb calcium into the blood. And the third way, I think, is through vitamin D, which is also in the kidney. So it activates an enzyme for vitamin D, which will then translate to more calcium.
Boom. Yeah. Which enzyme do you know?
Is it 1,2,5 something hydroxylase?
Close. It's 1-hydroxylase. It's called 1, right? Because it's hydroxylating when adding a OH group to the 1 carbon. And the reason why you're thinking of 125 is because it's adding the 1 hydroxyl group to 25 hydroxyl vitamin D. So you form 125 dihydroxyl vitamin D, but it's the one that's happening in the kidney is 1-hydroxylase. Wow, that's really good. That's impressive for someone that's in their clerkship. So that's really good. Yeah. So basically, it increases your absorption. It's causing phosphate to reabsorption to go down, and it's activating 1-hydroxylase in the kidneys. I didn't list, but Alex did point out that it also causes bone resorption, which we'll talk about probably next time. It's interestingly enough, it actually is not because of actions directly on osteoclasts. It's actually actions on osteoblasts, right? So the osteoblasts are the things that are basically directing the osteoclasts. So it activates osteoclasts to release what's called rank ligand, which we'll talk about next time. All right. So Andrew, so what would make sense then? So based on its actions, what would make sense that would regulate PTH activity? Because again, just like Harsha, right? We're trying to make sense of this stuff. We're trying to make connections. We just don't want to memorize this stuff.
Sure. Decreased serum calcium, magnesium, and vitamin D are all stimulants for PTH release.
Perfect. And why would that make sense?
Because its effects are increasing calcium. So if it's low, then you want it to go up.
Yeah, exactly. I guess it's easy for me to think about just like, okay, so it's increasing calcium, decreasing phosphate, and increasing vitamin D, activated vitamin D. Okay. So if that's true, then it would make sense that decreasing my calcium, decreasing my vitamin D, as you said, right? Or increasing my phosphate, all of which should lead to PTH increase. So yeah.
Okay.
Yes, technically magnesium also can, the effects of which I'm still not entirely clear on, but yeah, magnesium can also increase PTH, having low magnesium, if it's not too low.
Should I not worry about that one?
No, it does show up in
Sure.
tests. It does show up in tests. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because you know about magnesium as well. I just think it's easier to think, because like it's easier to think about, that one doesn't make as much sense to me on like why it would work or like why that would necessarily be true. I guess in the sense that I think it causes increase in like reabsorption of magnesium. So that actually does make sense, like the little bit. It's the one where I think if it's really low magnesium, for whatever reason, I think it decreases parathyroid hormone, which doesn't make sense to me.
Okay.
So yeah, it's a weird thing. But these all make complete sense, right? PTH increases calcium, so it makes sense that if calcium is low, it should increase. PTH decreases phosphate, so it makes sense that if phosphate's up, it would increase PTH. And it increases vitamin D, so it makes sense that low vitamin D would increase the production of dihydroxy vitamin D. So BARGs, I guess I'll explain this. So parathyroid hormone, right? The parathyroid gland releases parathyroid hormone, which acts on the kidneys, which does three things, right? Increases calcium reabsorption, decreases phosphate, and is going to increase vitamin D. So as we are wont to point out, these all have negative feedback, or all feedback on the parathyroid glands to affect parathyroid hormone release. So when calcium goes up, we're going to have decrease in parathyroid hormone release. Phosphate goes down, same thing. So Paul is asking, I think the way that it works is that if you have low magnesium, it actually increases PTH, right? If it's a little low, but if it's like super, super low, then it can cause decrease in PTH. I've been looking for the mechanism. I haven't found it yet. So if someone can confirm that, that would be great. But yeah, it's just one of those like weird things. So like alcoholics can, if you're alcoholic and you have nutritional deficiencies, you have really, really, really low serum magnesium, it can actually mimic hypoparathyroidism. Okay, so let's talk about some clinical applications. So Danielle, so if I had osteolytic metastases, meaning metastases that are causing bone breakdown, what would my serum calcium and PTH levels be and why? Helene, what do you think?
Calcium would be increased and PTH would be decreased
Great, okay, why?
because you have osteoclasts that are breaking down the bone
But why would PTH be low?
because of the negative feedback.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so very simple. All like the same general theme. So if my calcium goes up, so in this case, the calcium is going up because I have breakdown of bone. And so that will cause a feedback inhibition of the parathyroid glands, right? Causing a decrease in my parathyroid hormone. Yeah. Very straightforward. Again, feedback inhibition is like the one golden concept for virtually all of endocrinology. Okay. Can you explain to us, Danielle, then, what is parathyroid hormone related protein?
So this is with when you have like a cancer. I think it's small cell, or is it large cell?
So it's actually squamous cell. Interesting.
Or
So,
squamous cell.
so remember that. So everyone thinks like small cell for any sort of paraneoplastic syndrome.
Mhm.
Like virtually all of them are caused by small cell lung cancer, which kind of makes sense because small cell. Actually did research in small cell lung cancer in med school, but it's a neuroendocrine tumor, right? So neuroendocrine cells, they're basically like neurons, but they respond to endocrine signals too. So like it makes sense that you could release ACTH from small cell because it's basically like it's a neuron-like cell. Same thing with, like ADH or things like that. So the one thing that is not from small cell though is PTHRP, and that is squamous cell carcinoma. So
Yeah, you have this on a card. I always forget what SCC stands for. I always think it's health.
okay. Yeah.
But anyway, so if the squamous cell carcinoma was secreting parathyroid hormone related protein, you would expect your calcium levels to be, your serum calcium levels to be really increased and your PTH to be low because it's causing your body to absorb more calcium because it's tricking your body thinking that it needs to.
Yeah, exactly. That's good. You even answered my next question. So PTHRP it's a protein that's, as the name suggests, it's similar to PTH and can bind to PTH receptor. So it is associated, as you said, with squamous cell carcinoma of the lung. Interestingly enough, I didn't know this. So you can find it in breast cancer, but the reason why that makes sense is that like PTHRP, I thought that it was like this vestigial remnant of, when we were, I don't know, birds or something. Someone told me once that it was related to calcification of like eggs, but apparently PTHRP actually also, or just, is related to mammary gland development. So it makes sense that you would have, that PTHRP could be elevated in breast cancer. Emmanuel's asking, is that considered a paraneoplastic syndrome? PTHRP elevation in small cell or in squamous cell carcinoma of the lung would be considered paraneoplastic, pretty sure. Yeah. Okay. So Danielle already answered this question as well. So yes, if we had high PTHRP, if we had squamous cell carcinoma of the lung, our calcium would be high and our PTH would be low. This is important because even though it's related to the PTH protein, it is not the PTH protein. So when I measure PTH, it's not measuring PTHRP. All right. So again, same exact mechanism, right? PTHRP is going to cause calcium to increase. That calcium increase is going to cause inhibition, feedback inhibition on the parathyroid gland, and that can cause decrease in PTH. That is what we see. So Elisa, what exactly is the half-life, or what generally is the half-life of PTH?
It's short.
Really short.
Minute.
Yeah, like in the order of minutes. Now, Elisa, can you explain why would that help us understand the effect of PTH? Like, why would it make sense that we would have a...
So I can imagine that it has to do something with the small range calcium levels can be. So if they get too low, then you have symptoms. And if they get too high, you have quick symptoms as well. And I think it has to do something with the interaction with the other cations, sodium. Yeah. And affecting basically the potential of the membranes of the cells.
Yeah, perfect. Exactly. Yeah. So in other words, calcium is really important. So basically every single action potential in your body, calcium is the end result, right? Activate muscles, calcium comes in. Activate neurons, calcium comes in, right? So it also, as you're alluding to, sets or helps determine the threshold of polarization potential for voltage-gated sodium channels. If you don't remember this or you didn't learn it, I would highly recommend the renal lecture on calcium. The short answer is that if I'm hypocalcemic, I'm basically lowering the threshold for depolarization of my sodium channels. And if I'm hypercalcemic, I have a higher threshold for depolarization of my calcium channels. So calcium is very important. So it makes sense that since parathyroid hormone is the major thing that's regulating our calcium levels, it makes sense that we would want very, very tight control of it. And in order to do that, we would have a very short-lived PTH. So clinically, Emmanuel, how do we use this clinically? The fact that this is such a short half-life, probably multiple ways we could use this, but there's one major way that we use this clinically.
I guess maybe to see if it's like primary or secondary, like parathyroidism or hyperparathyroidism.
So I'm asking specifically like the fact that it is such a short half-life. In other words, the levels are going to change very quickly if I measured it in the blood. So it's a bad question because it's sort of like a read my mind question, but it's to tell you that in parathyroid surgery, if I take out the parathyroid gland,
you remove it, right? Like, don't the levels come back to like normal?
Yeah, within like minutes.
Yeah,
kind of amazing, right? When you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So in other words, if it was a protein like albumin, right? If I cut out the liver so the liver makes albumin, right? Albumin has a really long half-life, right? So weeks, I think, certainly more than days. So if I cut out the liver and I just removed your ability to make albumin, you would still have high albumin levels for a while, right? Days, weeks, maybe even months. However, if I remove your the reason for that is because it has a much longer half-life. If I remove your parathyroid glands, we'll know immediately, right? Because your parathyroid hormone levels will drop really fast. If I'm searching for, like, say, a primary hyperparathyroidism, right? I'm taking out a primary hyperparathyroid gland, then I can measure the PTH levels. And if it's normal, it means that I found the gland that I was looking for. It's really cool. So they do that in surgery. You can just measure. It's also, after they do thyroid surgeries, one of the questions they'll ask is like, basically, do you have symptoms of hypocalcemia? So they'll ask like, oh, do you have any tingling around your lips? Or do you have other sorts of hypocalcemia things like paresthesia, things like that? So again, because the effects of, if you were hypoparathyroid, and if you inadvertently, one of the most common causes of being hypoparathyroid is if they accidentally take out your parathyroids when they're taking out your thyroid in thyroid gland surgery. And so if they take out your parathyroid glands, right, you would also know pretty quickly, because again, the levels would fall very quickly. Perfect. So one other interesting thing, so Harsha. So in parathyroid hormone, if I give it continuously versus if I give it intermittently, what are the effects?
If you give it continuously, then I'll assume there would be a greater reabsorption of the bone. Eventually, the density of the bone goes down. Intermittent exposure, I'm not too sure what happens with that.
Okay. So this is something that a lot of people don't know. So if you give it continuously, you have net bone breakdown. Right? Well, that's what we normally think of, right? Because the times when we see hyperparathyroidism, it's almost always continuous. However, if you give it intermittently, right, if you give it in a pulsatile fashion, which is how most hormones or many hormones are delivered, right, it actually causes net bone growth. Right? It's cool. So you can actually, it's like the one drug, I forget the brand name of it, but giving like a PTH analog is like the one way that you can actually cause that bone growth, right? Because most drugs are to prevent bone breakdown, right? Like bisphosphonates, denosumab, stuff like that. They're all basically trying to prevent osteoclast treatment. So intermittent PTH can be used, so intermittent PTH can be used for really, really bad osteoporosis. I haven't seen it that much, but it can be used if you have really low bone density. This is similar, interestingly enough, to GnRH, right? So if you remember GnRH, if you give it continuously, causes suppression of FSH and LH. Right? If you give it in a pulsatile fashion, it actually causes release of FSH and LH. So PTH isn't the only hormone like this. There are other hormones, or at least one other hormone like this, which you could also use clinically. Jason, do you know what the name of the drug is that's a GnRH agonist?
Yeah, it's leupride.
Perfect. Yeah, leuprolide. Great. And so leuprolide. So Jason, can you explain to me, so what are the effects if given continuously versus intermittently? And how can you use that to explain what it can be used for? Because you'll see this in things like first aid, or be like, oh, it can be used for blah, blah, blah. And it seems on the surface like hogwash, because you're like, no, it's like, those are the opposite things. That doesn't make any sense.
So if we give it continuously, let's see, it's going to kind of like shut off or like cancers that are affected by like the FSH and LH level, because it's going to knock it off. So
great. So what cancers are affected by FSH, LH, or the downstream products of FSH and LH? Give me an example.
I'm trying to like, is it scrotal cancer? Could that be?
Yeah, nice. I think you're thinking prostate cancer, I think. So testosterone-dependent prostate cancer, estrogen-dependent breast cancer, same thing. There are testosterone-dependent prostate cancers. And so if I were to give continuous levels of leuprolide, I could cause suppression of FSH and LH, which would cause suppression of testosterone release. What effect would that have on the cancer?
It wouldn't have a supply for growth.
Yeah, it could cause apoptosis of the cells because you're removing the growth factor. Great. Okay, so how about if we give it intermittently? What could we treat if we were giving it intermittently?
Infertility?
Yeah, exactly, right? If I wanted to augment my production of FSH and LH, you can use it for infertility. Yeah, exactly. So it's pretty cool. So again, this is like one of the general themes of endocrinology is that it's not just the level of the hormone, right? There are patterns of how much the hormone is released at different times of the day, but also like if you give it one way or if you give it another way, it will have literally the exact opposite effects. It's kind of cool. So intermittently, you can use it for infertility. Continuously, the big one that I'm aware of is that you can use it for sex hormone-dependent cancers. So the big one being testosterone-dependent prostate cancer. In theory, you'd think that you could also use this for estrogen receptor breast cancer, like ER-positive breast cancer, even probably PR, I'd imagine, PR-positive breast cancer. The difference, though, is that like it's shutting down like all of your hormones. So we have good effective drugs, right? SERMs, so tamoxifen or even raloxifene, that do the same thing in terms of inhibiting the estrogen effects in the breast, but not having inhibiting estrogen effects everywhere else. So I presume that's why we don't use it for ER-positive breast cancer, but you could. It would just essentially cause the woman to be in menopause. So probably want to do that. Okay, great. So Shama, we're going to switch and talk about vitamin D now. Shama, what is vitamin D made from?
It's a steroid.
So
cholesterol, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So all steroid hormones are made out of cholesterol. So it's I think technically it is a steroid hormone, even though oftentimes you won't see it listed among steroid hormones. Technically it is, right? Because it is a hormone, right? It affects DNA transcription, but it's based off of cholesterol. Good. So Shama, where is it first synthesized?
I think it starts in the skin. You have like UV breakdown of, I'm not sure what bond.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it basically is producing, I think it's D3 at that point in the skin. Okay. Yeah. So you don't have to know the exact reaction. Yeah. Just know that the first reaction is happening in the skin and it uses UV light. Perfect. So who then would be prone to having vitamin D deficiencies?
Darker skinned people.
Yeah, exactly. So people that have melanin that's absorbing that UV light. Good. Or
people who stay inside.
Yeah, exactly. So I had my vitamin D levels measured while I was studying for step 1. And it was like, even though I went to Stanford, right, sunny California, my vitamin D levels were like, it was not low, it was very low. So I was like, this is like really depressing. So yeah, I went home to study for my step 1 and I went to the doctor because it had been a while. And yeah, she was like, yeah, my primary care physician was like, oh yeah, you should take your vitamin D. Yeah, it was like the very low level. So the good news is that Well, we'll talk about this, but the good news is that it is fat soluble. So unlike vitamin C, right, if I took like 10,000% of my daily intake of vitamin C, it's water soluble. And so it just stays in my urine and I pee it out. It does me no good. I can't store up my vitamin C levels. That's why they had to bring like fruit on the boats with them to prevent scurvy back in old sailing times. Vitamin D is different, right? You can give just gigantic doses of vitamin D. So when you treat hypovitaminosis D, they give, one of the ways they treat it is they give you 50,000 units for 8 weeks. So that's like literally 50 times the normal supplemental dose that they give you. The normal pills are like 1,000. They give you 50,000 units. They can do that because, again, it's cholesterol based. Well, all right. So Maliha, Jason said, what? Vitamin D supplementation isn't that important nowadays. Okay, Jason, you got to tell me. Really? What's the rationale? Is that true?
She was saying that because I'm in New York City and so it's wintertime and labs come back for a lot of patients and like vitamin D levels low. And so I had to look this up. She was saying that new research or literature came out that supplementing people low vitamin D level isn't that important and not something that needs to be prioritized, I guess. So I can look into that because I was surprised by that.
I've not heard that. I mean, I guess I wouldn't be totally shocked because there's not really good evidence for most vitamins.
Exactly.
But like vitamin D was I thought the one that like you were supposed to do. So I know really, really, really low vitamin D levels. I don't know if mine was like technically that low. When they did it was like, I can't remember. It was in Negim or something. It was in a relatively large journal. They supplemented low vitamin D levels, and I think they decreased like URIs or some articles. Vitamin D can increase breast cancer. Wow. Clearly there's a lot. So vitamin D, again, steroid hormone, has a lot of diverse effects. I guess I'm not surprised that there are some off-target effects. Interesting. The last thing I heard from someone who seemed to know what they were talking about was my wife's PCP. She was saying that basically she doesn't check vitamin D levels anymore because everyone's is low. You can just assume that everyone's is low, at least in Seattle where we live, where it's cloudy a lot. So you just supplement, you just treat empirically. Okay, so in the liver, you have 25-hydroxylase, which adds the 25-hydroxyl group. And then after the liver, where does it go and what happens?
After the liver, it goes to the kidneys where it's hydroxylated a second time by alpha-1 hydroxylase.
Yeah, perfect. Or 1L-hydroxylase. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So 1-hydroxylase. So you get the 25-hydroxylase adds a hydroxyl group to the 25-carbon. So that's where you get 25-hydroxyl vitamin D. 1-hydroxylase, actually, as the name suggests, adds a hydroxyl group to the 1-carbon, right? So you end up having 1,25-dihydroxyl vitamin D. Yeah, perfect. And then Maliha, what did we say regulates 1-hydroxylase activity in the kidney?
PTH and I think it's like calcitonin, I think? I'm guessing.
Largely PTH. I don't know.
Okay.
I wouldn't be surprised. Calcitonin is one of those things that like you need to know technically what it does, even though clinically it's not particularly relevant other than measuring its levels if you have like medullary carcinoma of the thyroid. But yeah, so PTH causes increase in 1-hydroxylase activity. Great. All right, Manny, we already kind of talked about this. Elisa says, okay, so one small add-on. There's a big study in vitamin D in MS who had high levels of vitamin D. MS took a milder course. Interesting. This is from vitamin D. That's cool. I had no idea. Again, not entirely surprising. And based off of Manny's answer to our next question, I think we can probably explain partially why that'll be true. Manny, what do you think? So is it fat soluble or is it water soluble?
Pretty sure it's fat soluble. So it's intercellular.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, boom. Yeah. So you even knew what I was going to ask next. You knew it was going to be, okay, so it's fat soluble, right? So it's cholesterol. It's cholesterol based, like all steroid hormones. So it's fat soluble. Makes total sense. Which is why you can give 50,000 units a week to supplement. Although, again, apparently, according to Negim November 2018, that's really recent, the findings of the 25,000 person study, supplementation with vitamin D did not result in a lower incidence of invasive cancer or cardiovascular events in placebo. Oh, okay. So it did not result in lower incidence. Okay. So it's not good for you. I guess so. I guess we can say it's not good for you in terms of cancer or heart disease. Although you should know, at least for step 1 purposes, that basically the 2 ways to prevent osteoporosis, we'll talk about this later, but the 2 ways to prevent osteoporosis are vitamin D and weight-bearing exercise. So I presume that I would imagine that it's still important for that, but I don't know, maybe not. Medical research, always changing. So what other hormones, assume, have intracellular receptors? And how can you make sense of these?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, like cholesterol-based hormones.
So all the steroid hormones, great. So name some.
Oh, like estrogen, cortisol, I think aldosterone. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. All of them. Yeah. Perfect. Okay. There's one other one other than vitamin D.
Not sure.
You weren't here last time we talked about this, but it's thyroid hormone.
Oh, okay.
Why would that make sense? Why would it make sense that thyroid hormone has an intracellular receptor?
Someone else has. I don't know.
It's okay. You weren't here. You weren't here for the lecture. Anyone else? Can someone tell us why does thyroid hormone have an intracellular receptor, Sarah?
It has tyrosine and iodine, and tyrosine is a nonpolar amino acid.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So just like cholesterol is nonpolar, tyrosine itself is a nonpolar amino acid. So it would also cross membranes. So you don't need to have a receptor on the surface. Perfect. Exactly. All right, Mitsu. So what are the effects on vitamin D on serum calcium and phosphate, and how?
I remember that vitamin D raised up the calcium level and phosphate level down.
Phosphate level down actually increases phosphate level.
Okay.
So how does it increase them? So this you have to know. This is like one of those things that they like to test. So how does it affect calcium and phosphate levels?
The absorption raise up the absorption.
Perfect. Where?
From gut.
Yeah, exactly. UGI tract. Yeah. So increases absorption of both calcium and phosphate. Yep. Exactly. Perfect. So based on that, Paula, the fact that it increases calcium and phosphate, what would you imagine is going to regulate vitamin D's activity or activation?
So I would assume that probably calcium and phosphate. Yeah. And we mentioned in a couple of slides before that PTH also regulates it.
Yeah,
due to increasing alpha hydroxylase.
Good. Yeah. So PTH we talked about. And then again, it makes sense that calcium this should be down. Calcium down.
Both, right?
Or
Both would be down.
phosphate down should lead to, calcium up. Glad that we're doing this. Perfect. Okay. So what effect then does PTH have on vitamin D? We said. So it causes increase in 1-hydroxylase activity in the proximal tubule. So it leads to more activated vitamin D, which makes sense, right? Because PTH, the main role of PTH is to regulate your serum calcium largely. So to do that, it would increase vitamin D. Sarah asks, is there a specific region of the GI tract where calcium is absorbed? I'm sure there is. I don't know where it is. I don't know if anyone knows. And Jason says, new research says vitamin D doesn't protect against fractures and bone. What was the continuation of that, Jason?
That research was saying like 40% of the adult population, that's the reason they're taking their vitamin D, or why it's authored, why it's given, for it to protect against fractures and bone disease, and it's really not going to do that for them.
I talked to a radiologist who does like bone mineral density studies. I think, so vitamin D definitely does decrease osteoporosis. I don't think there is any evidence though that shows that vitamin D decreases fractures, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's when they're saying it doesn't, but a large percentage of the population believes it does, and that's why a lot of physicians give it to their patients, thinking that it's going to be protective in those type of instances with falls and things.
Yeah, I talked to a radiologist whose husband was a vascular surgeon, and he said that he thinks, because like these things it's not like they're not benign, right? So if you constantly have high levels of calcium, there's going to be effects. So basically what he was saying was that what he sees, right, because he does surgeries on blood vessels, that's like his thing. What he sees is a large incidence of calcification in blood vessels, like much more, over the last like decade or two than he did before, early in his career. And so he thinks that it has to do with the fact that we are taking too much calcium, too much vitamin D. So yeah, it would make sense. It wouldn't be the first time that we treated a number and caused unintended problems, which you guys have raised the issues of. Can you tell me what kind of calcification would it likely be? Would it be dystrophic calcification or metastatic calcification? Presuming it's because of hypercalcemia. How about, pick on Elisa, what do you think? Would it be dystrophic or metastatic calcification most likely?
I would think it's, in let's say atherosclerosis, you see mainly destructive, but in high calcium levels, it's with normal calcium levels. So in high calcium levels, you would see destructive.
Let's be clear. So there's two kinds of calcification that you can see in tissues. So there's dystrophic calcification, which means that the tissue is dying, right? The tissue is damaged for some reason, and you get calcification. So
right, like pancreatitis, for example.
Yeah, pancreatitis would be like a classic example. Yeah, you like damaged tissues, and so you can get calcification there. Metastatic calcification is where you actually have high calcium levels, right? Or levels. And so it just precipitates just because you have high calcium levels. So I presume, again, there may be some combination of both, but if it's because of high calcium levels, you would assume that it would be from metastatic calcification.
Metastatic. Okay. Yeah.
Trying to bring in more step 1 concepts, All right, so let's talk about kidney failure and PTH. So Paula, can you explain the serum PTH and calcium levels in kidney failure? What is the mechanism?
So if I think of kidney failure as the kidney is not working anymore, I would think that they would have decrease in alpha hydroxylase and therefore decrease in vitamin D and decrease your absorption of calcium because of the dead cells and because of the decrease in vitamin D. And then that decreased calcium would stimulate the release of PTH.
Boom. Okay, so calcium would be what and PTH would be what?
Calcium would be low and PTH would be high.
Wow. Yeah, exactly. That's really good. I'm impressed. That's really good. Yeah. So would you call that primary hyperparathyroidism or secondary hyperparathyroidism?
Secondary.
Why?
Because it's not at the actual organ that releases the parathyroid hormone. It's something like secondary. I don't know how to say it without saying secondary. But yeah, an external organ that stimulates it directly is what's making it higher.
Nice. Well done. I'm impressed. That was really good. That was really good. Yeah, I'm genuinely impressed. Elaine is asking, in dystrophic calcification, would calcium levels be normal? Typically, yeah. I mean, I guess there's nothing that prevents it from being high, but the reason why you're getting calcification is not because the calcium levels are high. So yes, typically they would be normal. Good. Nice. Okay, Perlina. In secondary hyperparathyroidism, secondary 2, right? So this is fancy nomenclature that I want to introduce to you guys if you haven't seen it. 2/2 means secondary 2. Kidney failure. What would the phosphate levels be and why?
So if there was kidney failure again, there'd be a problem with the PCT. Let's see. So since there's a problem with the PCT, 1-alpha hydroxylase would be decreased, as would vitamin D. Vitamin D usually helps increase the phosphate absorption. Okay, let me try this again. I'm sorry. Okay, so because the kidneys are failing, like what Paula just said, that whole mechanism, the PTH is high. Let's see. PTH is high. It usually causes phosphate excretion to increase.
Good.
But since the kidneys fail.
It's okay. So let me walk you through.
Yeah.
So normally,
Okay.
so parathyroid hormone normally causes phosphate to you to lose phosphate. However, where do you lose phosphate typically?
The PCT?
Yeah, in your kidneys, right?
Yeah.
So if your kidneys are failing, right, how effective are you at getting rid of phosphate?
You're not, so it'd be elevated.
Suck at it. Yeah. So your phosphate's going to be up. So normally you would think that in hyperparathyroidism, right, because parathyroid would cause phosphate to be down, normally you would think that it'd be low.
Right.
In secondary hyperparathyroidism, specifically secondary to kidney failure, it's actually high. That's the key to remember.
Thank you.
Yeah, please. What's up?
Conversely, on talking about phosphate levels, so since we're not getting any vitamin D synthesis anymore, if we have kidney failure, and vitamin D is responsible for phosphate absorption in the GI, isn't that kind of like the opposite effect too?
You think so? Yeah. So then it's just a matter. So you're right? So there's one thing that you're presuming is going to cause a decrease in phosphate, and you've got another thing that presumably is going to cause an increase in phosphate. Then it becomes a matter of which factor matters more, because presumably too, right? In secondary hyperparathyroidism, presumably you're also going to be breaking down bone. Right? Your bone absorption is going to be high, which you see, right? That's one of the problems in secondary hyperparathyroidism. So really, there's two factors that would increase your phosphate, and only one that would decrease it. So not that is like the be all and end all. However, what you do see is that people's phosphate is elevated, and so you have to figure out why. So you're right, totally right. I love that you're thinking about the effects on vitamin D. And yes, your vitamin D being low would cause low phosphate absorption. But I think the point is that you have enough phosphate in your body, and if you can't excrete it, then it'll be high in your blood. Does that make sense? Perfect. Okay, so lastly, we're going to talk about extrarenal 1-hydroxylase deficient, or extrarenal 1-alpha hydroxylase activity. So Sarah, where is 1-hydroxylase found in the body typically?
It's found in the kidney, in the proximal renal tubule.
Yeah, perfect. Proximal tubule of the kidney, sometimes called the PCT, proximal convoluted tubule. Great. And so what is its function again, Sarah?
So it adds the other hydroxyl group to 25 hydroxyl vitamin D. So it becomes 125.
Perfect.
dihydroxy.
Exactly. So when I went to my most recent PCP in Boston, I asked him to check my vitamin D levels, right? Because it was so low. So I was like, okay, so let's just check it, please. I just want to see what my vitamin D levels. And it was funny because he was like, I saw him like, he's like one of those older physicians who you could tell that computers weren't, he wasn't like trained in computers when he went through training. So he was like clicking and he's like trying to decide which vitamin D to order. Because there's like, you can order all of them, right? You can order vitamin D, or you can vitamin D3, you can do 25 hydroxyl, 125 dihydroxyl. So he was like kind of pausing. I was like, I'm pretty sure it's blah, blah, blah. So Sarah, do you know which vitamin D is the storage form of vitamin D that you would actually check?
It's the 25D.
Perfect. Yeah. Why does that make sense?
Because the 125 would be being used in the body, but the 25 would have the highest levels because it's the storage form.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it makes total sense. So I sort of thought there was like, oh, I'm pretty sure it's 25 hydroxy. It was good.
Always appreciate it when patients help.
I know. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You laugh, but that was like the story of my residency. Like a patient comes in and has this weird condition I've never heard of. Like, what exactly? I feel like you explained it to me. Like, oh, thank you so much. They have some drug that I've never heard of. So what do you always try to be like clever. So what are you taking this medication for? Right? Like, not like, what is the drug do? So which of your conditions is this helping you with?
Find the most professional way to say, I want what you're talking
Exactly. I found in general patients respond pretty well to saying like, no, I don't know. So anyways. All right. So Alex, walk me through what else has 1-hydroxylase activity?
Can't really think of anything.
It's one of those things that if you don't know it, you would never in a million years, like I never in a million years would have imagined this.
I think maybe like something in the progesterone pathway. There's a bunch of hydroxylase.
No, it's not. You would have thought so, yeah. Like in the adrenals, it's not the adrenal gland. Although that would have made a lot of sense. Does anyone know? It shows up sometimes, Paula.
Yeah, macrophages.
Macrophages, yeah. Specifically, what kind of macrophages, do you know?
No, I'm not sure. I just remember like from when you have like TV or something.
Exactly. So I didn't know this. It's actually epithelioid macrophages specifically, which makes sense why it would be TV. So why, Paula, what makes epithelioid macrophages so special?
I'm not sure. Are they like, if they're in the epithelium?
Oh, epithelium just means it looks like. Wait, sorry.
Epithelial. I have no idea.
An epithelial cell. So remember this, like if you're studying for step 1, tattoo this onto your wrist. Like they like these kinds of facts. So they won't necessarily test you on this fact directly, but it will be important for interpreting certain questions. So remember that the defining cell of granulomas is not giant cells. It is in fact epithelioid macrophages, right? Epithelioid cells. So if you see an epithelioid cell, it tells you that it is a granuloma. Right. So remember that a group of experts sitting around a table has to be able to agree on the diagnosis, has to agree on the answer without looking at the answer choices. So that also means that they have to give you enough diagnostic clues that you should know definitively what the answer is. Right. So they have to give you, if it's a granuloma, they have to give you a histiocyte, an epithelioid macrophage. They have to do it because without an epithelioid cell, it's not a granuloma. So they have to give it to you. Just like, for example, there's all those criteria for Kawasaki's disease, right? There's like a ton of criteria for Kawasaki's disease. So you have to give all of the criteria for Kawasaki's disease for it to be Kawasaki's disease, right? So you'll see Kawasaki's disease has like really long vignette because they have to give you all of the different criteria. Same thing with epithelioid macrophages. So if you see an epithelioid macrophage, it is a granuloma. Manuel is asking, is an epithelioid macrophage the same thing as an epithelioid histocyte? Have you ever heard of an epithelioid histocyte? But I guess maybe. I don't know. Where did you hear of an epithelioid histocyte?
I think I either heard it or read it on in my papilloma. I think Dr. Satar had mentioned it, but like I just Googled it and the functions seemed like fairly similar, so I wasn't like.
So it might be. Sure. I honestly don't know, but yeah, the key is that it's an epithelioid cell. Okay, so according to Wikipedia, they are great.
Oh, okay.
Epithelioid histocyte, same thing. They define a granuloma. Thank you, Paula. So what kind of kidney stone then, Andrew, could you get in sarcoidosis and why?
Calcium based, because there's an excess of calcium secondary to the excess vitamin D because of the excessive 1-hydroxylase activity.
Oh, yes, exactly. That's really good. Yeah, exactly. So you can see hypercalcemia and thus you can get, right, so epithelioid macrophages, finding solid granulomas, have 1-alpha-hydroxylase. So you get more activated vitamin D. More activated vitamin D means more calcium absorption in the gut, which means more urine calcium, which means you could get calcium stones. Nice. Well done. That's really good. Perfect. Okay, so let's go through this list. So this is another way of describing basically what it is that we already talked about. And you will see this not uncommonly for mainly step 1, but certainly you can see it for step 2. So Danielle, can you walk me through? So when we look at a graph, the first thing that we look at is we look at the axes. So Danielle, can you walk me through the axes? Specifically tell me like, why does it make, so walk me through the axes. So tell me what the axes are, and then you want to predict like, what do you expect to see on the graph?
Yeah, so we have calcium and parathyroid hormone are axes. So essentially, if you have, I guess if you go to the top right corner, you have the highest amount of calcium and the highest amount of PTH. And like possible things like, would you like me to say possible things like chromosomes?
Sure. Well, sure. Well, let's start with top.
Okay, so top left would be, so for top left, you have really high parathyroid hormone levels and I guess low to medium levels of calcium. So for that could be
Let's
like
assume low, like low calcium.
Low, okay.
Low to normal, sure. Low to normal.
I don't know if that could be like would it be like a secondary cause of parathyroid hormone?
Okay, good. So give me an example.
Like what we said earlier with the kidney, secondary hyperparathyroidism, or like I guess like I'm kind of blanking right now because it wouldn't be like a tumor.
Okay, where would it? Sure.
I guess the tumor would fall into the bottom right corner.
Okay, great. So you're saying secondary hyperparathyroidism. Okay, so Elaine, what would be another cause of secondary hyperparathyroidism potentially?
Another cause can be, would it be squamous cell carcinoma or?
Okay, so walk me through the mechanism of squamous cell carcinoma, like the effects on calcium and PTH.
So PTH would be elevated just because it has the THRP protein.
So remember, if I measured someone's PTH and they have high PTHRP, they're actually separate protein. So assay is sensitive enough that it would not give, if my PTHRP was high, you wouldn't necessarily think my PTH was high. You can differentiate between the two.
Okay.
So where would PTHRP be in this diagram?
It's not shown in this graph.
Oh, well, okay, so walk me through. So it's really common. So this is a really common issue, I would say, in boards prep or like when you're doing a question, right? So let's say you're doing a question and your mind like immediately thinks of something. Oh, I'm thinking maybe, I don't know, PTHRP or something. So our associative mind is good at making associations, but it's lazy. So it doesn't, if you've ever read Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, right? The Princeton economist who won the Nobel Prize in economics, he basically says that like our fast thinking associative brain is very efficient. It works really, really fast, but it's not very good at checking your answers, right? It'll tell you something, but then you have to check it, right? So the same thing is, guy comes in with chest pain, right? You might be thinking, oh, am I, right? That's your associative brain. It's good, right? It's giving us an answer, but you also have to check it against something, right? So walk through in your head, if that makes sense or not. So Elaine, I want you to walk me through. So if it's PTHRP, what would be the effects on calcium and PTH?
Would PTH be elevated and calcium decrease?
Okay, so let's think about it. PTHRP, so has the same effects as PTH. Okay, so the calcium is going to be what?
Oh, increased.
Perfect.
And phosphate decreased. Right.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so if my calcium is increased, what are my PTH supposed to be?
Decreased
Okay, why?
because of the feedback.
Yeah, feedback inhibition. Yeah, exactly. So where would PTHR be? You said high calcium, low PTH. So where would that be?
I'm not quite sure.
Okay, so reading graphs, really hard, especially when like you're being put on the spot. So let's break it down. PTH. You said the PTH would be high or low in PTH?
Lower?
Low. Great. Okay. So is it going to be on the top part of the y-axis or the bottom part of the y-axis?
The bottom part.
Great. Perfect. Okay. So you said that calcium is going to be high or low in PTHRP?
High.
Great. So it's going to be on the right side of the calcium x-axis or the left side of the x-axis?
The right side. So it'd be the bottom right.
Yeah. Perfect. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We'll say it might sound like I'm picking on you, but it's really, I've noticed that like, I think schools are really bad at teaching like reading graphs. I remember when I first went to Stanford, like our professors were like, they gave us all these really complicated papers to read, or what I felt were really complicated papers to read. And they like had us discuss the figures and all that stuff. And I was like, oh my God, this is like exhausting. This is not what we came here to do. But afterwards I was like, I actually understand why they do that, because I think that a lot of schools don't really teach you how to read figures, don't really teach you how to do this. So like when you get a figure on step one, it's like really hard. So when you see a graph like that, it's best just to break it down into its component parts. So like we just did. So thank you, Elaine. Thank you for walking us through that. So Elisa, what else would cause you to have, what else might cause you to be in the upper left part of the graph?
Okay, so upper left. Okay, so we said high parathyroid hormone, low calcium. So we said renal failure, that would cause secondary hyperparathyroidism. Also other causes of low calcium. So what else would cause low calcium? For example, a vitamin D deficiency.
Perfect.
Calcium loss for other reasons.
Yeah, I'm not eating calcium. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
This would be secondary hyperparathyroidism, right? Vitamin D deficiency, decrease in calcium intake, or chronic renal failure. Yeah. Perfect. Nice. All right, Emmanuel. So let's go top right. So what would that be?
If top left is secondary parathyroidism, hold on.
We'll go to Harsha. We'll come back to Emmanuel. Harsha, or Emmanuel. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so if the top left is secondary hyperparathyroidism, that means the top right would have to be primary hyperparathyroidism.
Okay, I like that you're using elimination, but I want you to also explain it pathophysiologically. So why would that make sense?
Because you would have increased levels of both like PTH and calcium. So if your PTH is elevated, then you'd have the decreased levels of phosphorus and while still having the increased levels of calcium. And I think that's what like these type of like disorders, like they kind of like show in their labs. So that's what I was thinking, like there's like things like the cancers, I guess.
Okay, like what? What do you mean?
I'd say like maybe like an hyperplasia of like the parathyroid gland.
I see. Okay. Hyperplasia is not technically a cancer.
Or I guess maybe like an excessive secretion or like growth of the parathyroid gland.
Yeah, so there's hyperplasia, and then there's also neoplasm. What's the difference between hyperplasia and neoplasm?
Hyperplasia is an increase in the amount of cells that you have, but a neoplasm is an outright like growth, I guess. So I guess that would be like an adenoma.
Yeah, that's true. But what differentiates? So this is a technical definition, but so both involve increase in cell number, right? Hyperplasia, there's more cell number. Neoplasm, there's more cell number. The difference is that
like more disordered, like disorderly growth.
Not necessarily. You can have a benign neoplasm, right? An adenoma is a benign neoplasm, not necessarily disordered. The difference is that in hyperplasia, you will still respond to growth signals, either high or low.
Oh, okay.
If I were to give you EPO, or if I were to give you, I don't know, some sort of signal, that would be hyperplasia because you're responding to the growth factor.
So then neoplasm would be like growth on its own?
Yeah, exactly. It's independent of the growth, the typical growth signaling.
Yeah, cool.
So a benign, so that's, because again, that's a question that comes up sometimes, right? Is what's the difference between a benign neoplasm and hyperplasia? The technical definition, the technical difference is that in hyperplasia, you are responding, you can still respond to the normal growth signals. But in neoplasm, it's independent of those growth signals, which is why you can have like lipomas that grow gigantic. Right? It's a neoplasm, but it's not necessarily going to kill you. I mean, it's not malignant, right? But it's a benign neoplasm. It is growing independently of the normal growth signal. Okay, perfect. Yeah. So primary hyperparathyroidism, hyperplasia, or potential neoplasm. Okay. Harsha. So what about the bottom left quadrant? What would be in that quadrant?
So the bottom left quadrant would be both low PTH and low calcium.
Great. So what do we call that? Using our endocrine terminology.
Just hypoparathyroidism.
Great. Would it be primary or secondary?
It should be primary, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, it's primary.
Okay. So what would be an example of this? What would be some examples?
The one that I'm thinking of, I'm not 100% sure, but the George syndrome, I think that one has a lack of.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. Yeah. So any sort of problems with the formation of the parathyroids in the first place, so something congenital, or it can also be surgical resection. So I guess if you were in the primary hyperparathyroidism picture and they took out your parathyroid glands, this could certainly happen to you. The other cause, which is I think probably more common, is if you accidentally take out the parathyroids when you're doing thyroid surgery. So that's a not uncommon thing. Different surgeons have different sort of things that they look for afterwards to make sure that things are okay. So we talked before about asking the patient, are they having paresthesias, like numbness or tingling around their lips, so paresthesias anywhere else. Some will order a serum calcium level the next day. But yeah, it is a big concern that you could accidentally remove the parathyroids when you're doing thyroid surgery. All right, so Shama, walk us home. So in the bottom right quadrant, what would that be? And what would we call it using our term?
So that this would be secondary hypoparathyroidism. I mean, I guess the case that I'm thinking of is like squamous cell or renal cell carcinomas, where you have something that you have the parathyroid-like hormone.
Great. So Elaine was saying, great. So that's one of them. What's another one? What's probably a more common cause of this?
Just like high dietary intake of calcium.
It could, yeah. So it could be high dietary intake. Another one, probably a more common one, would be if you had metastases to the bone.
Oh, okay.
So remember that there are some cancers that cause an increase in bone growth. I think prostate's one of them. Prostate causes osteoblastic metastases, so an increase in osteoblast activity, while others give you osteolytic metastases. I want to say breast is one of them. But yeah, so metastases to the bone generally will cause bone breakdown. That will cause calcium to be released from the bone. Good. Alex is saying, is sarcoidosis one too? Wouldn't that be 1-hydroxylase activity increasing? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So so I sort of consider that to be hypervitaminosis D. But yeah, if you have high activity of vitamin D and you have high calcium, then yes, you will have feedback inhibition, decrease your VTH. Maliha is saying multiple myeloma. Absolutely. Yeah. So multiple myeloma can cause activation of osteoclasts and cause bone breakdown, causing hypercalcemia, which would feed back and cause low parathyroid hormone. Great. All right. So I think that this is actually where I want to wrap this up, because I want to do all the bone stuff together. So this is actually a perfect ending point. Questions, concerns?
Alec, I've got one.
Yeah.
If somebody had a GI disease, something that's causing malabsorption, Crohn's, whatever, would that person be at a greater risk for osteoporosis or hyperparathyroidism from a decreased absorption standpoint?
I would think so. But it's not like for something like Crohn's specifically. Remember that like your bone metabolism is also very affected by like stress hormones. Well, cortisol gives you osteoporosis, and generally just is bad for bones. Like there was a New England Journal study where they looked at like inhaled corticosteroids in kids that have asthma. So like lots of kids have asthma, right? A lot of people grow out of it, but lots of kids have asthma. So corticosteroids, usually you think of inhaled drugs as being pretty benign systemically, right? It gets to the lungs and there's some absorption, but the effects are mainly in the lungs. But what they found was that kids that used inhaled corticosteroids, it was something like 1 to 3 centimeters. They were like 1 to 3 centimeters shorter than kids that didn't. So not like a ton, it's like 1 inch. But yeah, there are still effects. But if you give steroids systemically, it has pretty dramatic effects on your bones. So I would imagine that in a condition like Crohn's, it wouldn't just be from the absorption aspect. I don't know of a disease specifically, like normally you don't think of osteoporosis is being caused by like short gut or things like that. Although I assume that's also probably true. That if you, in the same way that you can get secondary hyperparathyroidism from decrease in calcium intake, I presume that yes, if you just can't absorb it, that would also cause secondary hyperparathyroidism and potentially decrease in calcium, which could potentially lead to osteoporosis. Yeah, it's a good thought.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? Alex.
Can I ask a more clinical question, actually?
Of course.
Pertaining more. So you mentioned earlier, and I noticed this, there's 5 or 6 different tests you could order to test for vitamin D levels, like the 25 hydroxylase, 1 hydroxylase, direct vitamin D. Is there like, and I've asked doctors before and I've gotten different answers for what they usually order. And I don't know if it's like hospital policy or if there's like a standard test that you use just for like testing for low vitamin D levels. Is there like,
I'm pretty sure it's 25. I'm pretty sure 25 is the one that you measure.
So that being said, like, what is the point of having so many different options for?
That's a good question. I mean, I guess like in theory, right, you could have, if you say had a deficiency in your 1-hydroxylase, right? I'm sure that's a very small fraction, but I'm sure that it exists, right? There's deficiencies in like every enzyme. So if you had a deficiency, you could presumably prove that they had a deficiency because their 125 dihydroxyvitamin D would be low, but their 25 hydroxyvitamin D would be high. Or, because the 125 is the active form of vitamin D. By measuring the 25 hydroxyvitamin D, you're measuring like the stuff that's stored, but it's not really the active stuff. Generally though, if you look at, because I checked this for myself just to make sure, if you look in like, say like the hospital's handbook, or I looked in maybe the outpatient medicine handbook. I'll check that again. If you look for like vitamin D deficiency, they say to check 25 hydroxy vitamin D. Yeah, so it says bottom line. So in the UCSF Outpatient Medicine Handbook, it says vitamin D deficiency and insufficiency are fairly common problems. Repletion has been shown to be beneficial for improving overall bone health, although I think Jason would argue with that. Check only the 25 hydroxy vitamin D levels for screening. So I've never heard of people using the other ones except for if it's an accident. Again, in theory, I presume that there's reasons to do it, but I don't know. I have never heard of another reason. I think someone else had a question.
So in pathoma, they mentioned like something called like pseudo hypoparathyroidism. Can you explain about that?
Yeah, so pseudo hyperparathyroidism, the general idea is that I think there's different kinds, but I think the problem is that you can't sense, what is it? Like somehow there's a problem with your calcium sensors. So you can't sense calcium properly. And so I think you end up having, I think that's it. But I think you end up having low parathyroid hormone release because it's a problem in the sensing of the calcium. Let me make sure. Because that was one of the things that I was going to talk about. So I have notes on it, but we didn't get to that. Yeah. Oh, sorry. It's unresponsiveness of the kidney to PTH. That's the problem. So my kidney can't respond to PTH. So the PTH is there. It's high. However, you will not have activation of vitamin D. You will not have activation of calcium absorption. So you'll have low calcium levels. So even though your PTH levels would be high, you'll have low calcium levels. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Other questions? I was thinking of the sensitivity to calcium. There's a drug that increases your sensitivity to calcium. So it's called cinacalcet. It causes you to sense, it's basically as if you think that you have more calcium than you actually do. So because of that, it's used in secondary hyperparathyroidism, I think in like kidney failure. When you have low calcium levels, you will have, it makes you think that you have higher calcium levels. So it'll decrease the amount of parathyroid hormone that you release. Because having high parathyroid hormone levels is not good for your bones because it causes bone absorption. Cool. All right, guys, thank you very much. In our next session, we will talk about all the bone stuff because I know that's something that I did not understand really at all. And I hope that you guys will join me because it's a cool topic. All right, guys, thanks a lot. All right, take care.
If endocrine finally makes sense, this next video shows how to think this way on every subject. You'll learn the framework that stops careless mistakes and turns confusion into consistency. Click here to watch how to virtually guarantee a step 2 260 plus and see how some students went from failing to more than 260.